Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound radio show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. And boy, did we have a little of all of that this week. Tonight we will be reviewing UFC Fight Night 131, a rare Friday card because the UFC didn't want to go up against one of the NBA Finals games. Wise decision. I mean, they got probably about the same viewership they would have gotten with going up against it, so... I mean, at least it was sound in theory. Man, like, nobody saw that card. It's nuts. We will also be previewing UFC 225, which is a really, really good card on paper, save, like, 2 fights. You have a double title fight on the for the top 2 fights. You have the official debut of Megan Anderson. You have... Crap, there was another good fight on that main card that I'm
Colby
blanking
Covington
on.
versus Hoffy.
No, they're an interim. They're one of the 2 co-main event. They're one of the top 2s. They have the theoretical interim welterweight title.
Alistair Overeem. He's on the
Blades
prelims.
is on the prelims, which is hilarious to me. Like, you're paying that guy
I even like Lamas and Bektic.
Yeah, that's the other one.
Fight.
And you've got poor Joseph Benavidez buried in the middle of the Fight Pass prelims.
That's horrendous.
He deserves it.
He's fighting Sergio Pettis. Like, that's actually a relevant fight.
So what?
There's like 5 fights I'd rather not see than that one that are visible on both FS1 and pay-per-view.
Yeah, I mean, somebody pointed this out, and it shocked me, but I think it's true. I haven't quite verified it entirely. But there has not been a male flyweight fight on the main card of any UFC event in 2018.
I can buy that.
I've gone through the first few, and I haven't verified all of them to this point, but I've verified a surprisingly high number. So,
and we're not counting Fight Pass. Fight Pass doesn't count.
Even Fight Pass, the differentiation point between prelim and main card on Fight Pass. I'm pretty sure. I'll double check that one, but anyway, we'll be going over all of that, and of course any major news items from the past week, such as the return of Yair Rodriguez, because it's a slow news week. What do you want me to say? So anyway, you can be on the lookout for all of that. You've already heard from them, but I'll go ahead and formally introduce the panel for you this evening, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Beauty of on-demand audio. Any place, anytime, anywhere, provided you have an internet connection or have previously downloaded it, and a device to play it. First up, my regular partner in crime for this show, 411 Mania's jack of all trades, Jeff Harris is here again. How you doing, Jeff?
Regulate weight cutting. I'm Jeffrey Harris.
Yeah, they did. That was the other thing, like that video of Darren Till's weight cut. Oh, God. That was gnarly. And holding things down for us on the East Coast, he's making time for this card because 2 of his boys are fighting on this upcoming event. And he has a chance to go back to being perfect about picking champions, because if Yoel Romero wins, that's everyone you've predicted officially to this point, including Robert Whittaker. But Pat Mullen is here. Pat, how did this evening find you?
I still technically will count Yoel Romero as a champion, but he has a chance to make it indisputable. We'll get into that later. And even though I may be on the East Coast, I'm still a fan of the California Raisins.
Oh. Stop motion animation. My childhood. All right. Let's get right into UFC Fight Night 131 from last night. This card was let me get this out of the way. This card was a slog. Everything after somewhat ironically, the 2 Fight Pass prelims were interesting for different reasons. All of the other prelims were meh. Yeah, they were pretty meh, even the ones that I found some interesting things in. On the main card, you had a terrible fight start things off, a somewhat interesting second fight, then a couple of fights that just, ugh. At least one of them was short, followed by the 2 actually relevant fights. But thank heavens for this main event. Sometimes I say that because it was a knockdown, drag-out, glorious back-and-forth fight. Not so much this time. Marlon Moraes head kicks Jimmy Rivera with one of the most beautiful switch kicks I've seen in a while, 33 seconds into the fight, and proceeds to pound him out on the mat. Oh, I needed that fight to go that way so badly because I was so dead. I was so just dead about this
And
card.
you hate Jimmy Rivera, apparently.
I do not hate Jimmy Rivera. Look, I would. Let me be fair. I would have said exactly the same thing if Rivera had knocked out Marlon Moraes with one punch. Just thank heavens it's over, and it ended in an exciting fashion.
You knew that wasn't going to happen because Jimmy Rivera doesn't finish fights.
I did
This was the outcome you wanted. You have been on the Moraes bandwagon for years now. This is your ideal outcome. This is what you wanted. And you got what you wanted. It's okay to admit it, Robert. It's okay.
Look, yeah, I picked Moraes. Like you said, I've been on the Moraes bandwagon for a bit. I certainly don't deny that. I was so burned on this card by the time we got to that main event. I just wanted it to be a good fight or to end quickly in an exciting fashion. And again, had Jimmy done that, I'd be saying the exact same thing about I'm so glad it ended that way. I'm slightly happier that it was Moraes that ended it because I'm a bigger fan of Moraes.
The main card fights weren't that bad.
Oh God, no.
Good.
You needed to find a couple of highlights, and we'll get into that specifically. But Jeff, I'll start with you as far as coming out of this fight. Again, you leaned towards Rivera last week. I leaned towards Moraes. Even though I picked Moraes, I did not expect this.
Neither did I.
What? I mean,
I don't think Marlon expected that.
Probably not. Do you have to do him for? We mentioned last week that we wanted the winner of this to be
the winner
in the title
of this
picture.
fight is the number one contender. Quite frankly, it's erroneous that a rematch between Dillashaw and Garbrandt is even happening right now.
I'd agree with that.
It's ridiculous.
Which we all said as soon as it was booked, too.
Yeah.
It was fine to do it. It was fine to do it the first time. Dillashaw had rightfully earned another shot at the title. Dominic Cruz is constantly getting hurt. To me, the winner of this fight is your number one contender. Now, look, crazy things happen. People get hurt. People fail drug tests. People miss weight. Crazy stuff happens in fights. There are questionable decisions.
People attack buses with chairs.
Yeah, right. All sorts of craziness is always happening in the sport. But to me, the definitive number one contender now is Marlon Moraes, and no one he shouldn't be accepting any fight next other than a fight for the UFC title, even if it means waiting a year and a half. Because if Raquel Pennington is going to do that, then so can Marlon Moraes.
Now, Raquel had the benefit of being in the worst division in the UFC.
Raquel fights at light heavyweight men's?
No. I say this completely seriously. As much as a dumpster fire as light heavyweight is, women's bantamweight right now is in a categorically worse situation.
I got to be honest. I was not convinced by Moraes. I mean, I thought he was a good upper level talent when he was fighting in WSOF. But I mean, that's the
level of competition is what it is, and it's less in other organizations.
Came to the UFC. He lost right off the bat to Rafael Assunção. He had a fairly
officially he lost. We can move on. Look, I thought he won, but officially he lost.
I thought he lost to John Dodson, honestly, and he got away with it. But look, these last two fights against,
Sterling
Rivera was a top 5 opponent. Sterling. Really, he's been a perennial top 10 guy, I think, for a while now.
In that area.
If you can beat Sterling, then you're for real. Like that's where he stands. Sterling's a tough, good opponent, even though I don't think he's quite put it all together to really get to that upper level. And Rivera was right there too. So this was kind of a dream fight that we at one point in time you didn't think would happen because you had Rivera was the top bantamweight in Bellator, and Marlon in WSOF, neither of whom contracted by the UFC, both guys you were hoping would eventually get there, and we got the fight.
Yeah, Pat, I wanted to...
he wasn't Bellator.
Yeah, he was in Bellator for a little bit.
I wouldn't say it was the top bantamweight Bellator.
Yeah,
He had
one
two
of the
fights.
top.
Okay.
He had a cup
Well,
of coffee there. He had 2 fights there.
We won't say from rankings wise, but we'll say I think talent wise, I think everybody was looking at him as, wow, look at this guy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
With the run he was having, and I don't think anyone was expecting him to just dominate Uriah Faber like he did.
I did.
And I mean, you hate Uriah Faber.
I do, but that was the first time I had ever picked against him when he was fighting in a non-title
Thomas
fight.
Almeida, but I'm very excited about
No, I think
Moraes
Frankie beat him.
being a top dog in this division now and hopefully fighting for the title next. So, gentlemen, go ahead.
Yeah, Pat, I wanted to mention that you weren't able to join us last week. What would have your pick been going into this fight? And I mean, both these guys fight out of your area. They both train right, within driving distance of you. So what were your expectations? And then, of course, the actual, for as much as the 33-second, that switch kick, Marlon's feet are so fast, it's obscene.
I definitely did not see what happened as what was going to happen in my head. Honestly, I was leaning towards Jimmy Rivera. I really thought Jimmy had performed better against a better level of opposition in the UFC, and I thought, even though he's not a finisher, I thought Jimmy would be able to fight on maybe slightly less than even terms with Marlon early before he figured out a strategy and started to apply it and really wore Marlon down as the fight went on and took control and won a decision. That's how I saw it going. Marlon, to his credit, didn't even let it get that far. He had, certain techniques he wanted to employ, one of them being the switch kick that ended the fight. And, Jimmy Rivera is not a guy who goes to sleep very easy either. So to put him out like that was super impressive. These are two of the best at 135, two of the best in the best division in mixed martial arts right now, especially in the UFC. This was a great opportunity for one of these guys to really make a statement, to come forward and state their case as to why they should be in a title fight. And Marlon took full advantage of it, and all credit to him. I don't think there's any necessarily real major things that Jimmy's going to go back and watch this fight other than just leaving himself open for the kick and eating it. It's not like he had a long time to really analyze things he did wrong. And it's not like this fight is going to knock Jimmy Rivera out of contention completely. He is going to have to win some fights again, but he lost to the best guy right now, arguably, who's not wearing the belt.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear when you look at the replay. He just thought that kick was going to the body instead of the head.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
Marlon, he disguised that with this really interesting. I mean, he's got really fast feet and hips, but he disguised what actually turned up to be the switch, with what looked like him stepping off further at an angle, that same angle, so to his left. So it almost looks like he's just kind of making a cross step. I mean, crossing his feet a little bit. Yeah, almost like he was kind of baiting him to do what Sterling did and kind of lean in and reach for that takedown off of his feet being a little bit out of position, and instead of just setting up that switch kick to the head. I'm all for Moraes fighting for the belt.
Marlon has this, and here's one thing of why that technique worked for Marlon. He has deceptively light legs. And when I say light legs, I mean that he's not overly squatty in the hips and thighs. And what that does is that enables a lot of flexibility and a lot of movement that you wouldn't normally have. And you can't feint as well when you're a little bit more on the weighty side in your hips and thighs. It's harder, and your motion is more deliberate, and your opponent's going to see it coming a little bit better, no matter how big or how small your shorts are. Marlon has those. He doesn't really have like meaty quads or thighs. He's able to have a lot of flexibility and quick movement, and that's one of those things we talk about as quick feet. That's a big part of why, and that's why he's able to make those moves that most guys can't.
And seriously, the sound on that head kick when it connected. Yeesh. But yeah, again, I am of the opinion he should be fighting for the belt next, just because I would love to see him fight Dominic Cruz, I really would. But we do need to try and inject some new life into the top 3 of that division. It can't just be a rotating circle of Garbrandt, Dillashaw, and Cruz. And no one's in a better position to move in there than Moraes. I honestly wouldn't hate them rebooking the Rivera and Cruz fight, because that was supposed to happen earlier this year before Dominic broke his arm.
I mean, considering, take under consideration if Dominic Cruz will ever actually fight again, which he might not, for all we know.
And I like that. Believe it or not, I like that fight more for Jimmy Rivera than I do for Dominic.
Really?
Because there's a reason for that. Rivera goes into it knowing his back is against the wall, coming off of a very quick one-sided loss to Marlon. If he needs to contend again, best way to do it is to go in there and beat a former champion who's one fight removed from losing the title. Dominic, coming off of an extremely long injury-plagued layoff yet again, coming in a fight where realistically he may not have that urgency knowing about how far removed he is from that fight and from the championship. Jimmy, that's the best time for Jimmy to fight him if he's got a chance to win.
That's fair. All right. Again, I don't hate that fight for Jimmy. I just like, again, I like Jimmy Rivera's fights. I don't think there's a whole lot to dislike about his performances as a general rule. If you don't do that, I mean, if you really want to kill off two contenders, put him in there with Rafael Assunção, because
the spoiler?
No. Not. I kind of like Jimmy in that fight. There's elements of his really methodical, kind of relentless style that I think kind of breaks down Assunção over time. But no one looks good against Rafael Assunção. I mean, TJ Dillashaw didn't look good against Assunção when he beat him. So he wins, and he beats an incredibly tough guy, but a guy that no one cares about, and he doesn't look good doing it. I mean, that's one of the worst outcomes you could get. But I mean, the top of bantamweight is in a really, really healthy place right now. I mean, there's almost nobody you could match him up with that I wouldn't be interested in. He was supposed to fight Brian Caraway at one point. Yeah, do that, because he'll smash Brian Caraway, and I'll be happy. Come on, make me happy, UFC.
Didn't Misha Tate already smash Brian Caraway?
She smashed his spirit.
I
Bingo.
would not be surprised if Brian Caraway was catching a little bit there, so to speak. All right. Random and baseless accusations about other people's sex life aside. In the co-main event, the other fight I was kind of looking forward to on this card, Gregor Gillespie defeats Vince Pichel via submission. It was an arm triangle choke in the second round. How do I say this? There's two things about Gregor that have me a little bit concerned. And these are certainly things one of them is a thing he can work on. So I don't mean to be an alarmist about this. And he's undefeated, he's winning. I am not trying to, crap all over his parade, because I have a lot of good things to say about him as well, but there's so many good things to say. I do want to open this by saying there's two things that I think he needs to be mindful of going forward. One is still his defense. He's a little stiff with his head movement. Now again, this is a fixable problem. The other, and this is significantly less fixable, Gregor marks up very easily. He dominated this fight and came out bleeding and with a swollen eye. And I'm 90% sure that's damage he inflicted on himself with proper head pressure and head position on Pichel. That's something you definitely have to be aware of if you're... Again, and look, that is not a disqualifier from him being very successful. Two of the best fighters ever, George St. Pierre and Fedor Emelianenko, both mark up very easily. The best boxer in the world right now, for my money, Vasily Lomachenko, kind of has the fighter's curse. He's got really defined features, defined cheekbones, and he gets cut. I mean, he's, again, I think the best boxer in the world, and he's done a good job of mitigating the fact that he kind of marks up. Joseph Benavidez, same thing. He cuts in basically every fight. Not a disqualifier, but if you are not mindful of your defense and you swell up and cut very easily, lesser fighters can take advantage of that. That being said, again, Gregor's wrestling is insanely good. He mentioned it on his post-fight interview. It's one of the best things about his wrestling game is his persistence. He's not a one-shot-and-done guy. He chains together. I mean, Khabib does this as well. He chains together takedown attempts until he gets you down. You can stop him 15 times, he'll get you on the 16th. And he's perfectly content doing that. His passing game is good. Mostly his knee slices from like half guard into full mount are really good, because he did that to Pichel a couple of times, and that's not easy. So there's still seasoning that has to be done for Gillespie, but I mean, he's undefeated, and he's making the improvements that you would hope to see in a guy still moving up in the world. I mean, I don't think you should throw him in there with the top 15 yet. Lightweight's an incredibly deep division. There's a lot of reasonable steps he can take still going forward if you want to keep moving him up at a reasonable pace. And, I mean, Vince Pichel I thought was a live underdog here, and Gregor kind of blew the doors off of him. Pat, I'll start with you on this, because you're kind of a fan of Vince Pichel, and so what did you think about this fight? Am I way off on Gregor's defensive issues, or is there something else you see in his game that might trouble him later? I'm struggling for things to talk about because it was such a one-sided fight in some respects.
Yeah, I think you're pretty well off on what you talked about in terms of his defensive liabilities. Really, his main defense right now is his aggression, just by putting the other guy on the defensive. And that's what we saw with Pichel. Vince Pichel has good tools at his disposal, but he was never in this fight. There was legitimately, I think, 2 points in time where they were standing and exchanging, and Gillespie just immediately grabbed a hold of him as soon as he didn't like what was going on and had very little issue taking him down. Pichel fought off one single leg in the second round and one, I believe, at the latter end of the first round. But otherwise, Gillespie he really impressed me more than anything with his grip strength, which is excellent, and with just his raw physicality. Because a lot of those things with Pichel, those takedowns, those passes, he did knee slice well, but a lot of times when fighting for positioning, he just straight out-muscled Pichel more than anything else.
He jams his head under his chin, he cross-faces really. I mean, he's got that nasty, like, wrestler. There's two types of wrestlers when it comes to that. One is more technical. The other is I know I can't punch you, but I'm going to hit you with a forearm about as hard as they'll let me get away with.
Yeah, just straight physicality that it's not the type of thing that's going to hurt you in the sense that it's going to make you close to being knocked out. It's the type of thing that hurts you and discourages you and demoralizes you. And that's impressive to see him go in and commit with that. That's something you saw guys in the very early days of MMA who came from a wrestling background do. Guys like a Dan Severn, guys like a Mark Coleman, those guys who came from a wrestling background and weren't overly familiar with the principles of punching or elbowing on the ground, but they could cross-face you. They could press that head into your chin, into your face, and really make you uncomfortable and just not want to be there. And he did that, and he did it well.
Jeff, again, Gregor Gillespie, one of the brighter prospects, I think, at lightweight at the moment. I mean, again, we're talking, he's still a couple of years probably away from being, on the elite level, but you got to feel generally pretty good about him going forward after the run he's on.
I mean, I'm impressed with him. I thought he looked great. And he's constantly finishing guys. He's not... So many times you'll see, like, a blue-chip wrestling prospect or a strong wrestling prospect who has the NCAA Division I background, but, they tend to be one-dimensional with their fights. And it's at least good to see that Gillespie has a few tools in his head and he's evolving. I mean, this was more of a showcase for his wrestling and his grappling, but he was fighting a very tough and I would say underrated opponent in Vince Pichel, and he submitted him. And that's 4 finishes in a row for him. So maybe not a huge step up in competition next, but maybe like fringe top 15 or lower end of the top 15 rankings.
All right. This is where we get into the part of the card that was kind of killing me. Walt Harris defeats Daniel...
Walt Harris got a finish. Should be happy for Walt Harris.
No. I will absolutely not be happy for Walt Harris. Because he put me through almost exactly 10 minutes of sloppy, mediocre, heavyweight action. Walt Harris defeats Daniel Spitz via TKO, punches and elbows at 4:59 of the second round. This was bad heavyweight MMA.
He's a country boy from Alabama. You should be a little nice to him.
The finish was like 101 of what not to do.
If you're Spitz, yeah. I mean, look, his only wins in the UFC, I think, have been via stoppage. Yeah, he knocked out Cody East, he knocked out Chase Sherman, he knocked out Cyril Asker, and he knocked out Daniel Spitz.
All cab drivers.
Yes.
I mean, it's heavyweight.
Walt Harris is basically a cab driver himself, so.
Yes.
He's a limo driver. That's one step up.
Okay.
There you go.
That's fair. I mean, the actual finish, again, it's terrible on the part of Daniel Spitz, but it is Walt Harris doing... I won't talk about the rest of the fight because it's awful. But Spitz throws an inside leg kick from opposite stance, and he just squares up his hips and his whole upper body when he does it, and his hands drop. And Walt Harris, seeing the biggest possibly flashing neon sign above Daniel Spitz's chin that says, "Hit me, please," is actually able to connect this time. That opening was there in other instances. Blasts him with a left. Spitz backs up into the cage because he's hurt and trying to survive. Harris follows him over, kind of pushes him down, elbows him a few times, and mercifully ends the fight. I have nothing positive really to say about either man coming out of this. I mean, if Harris hit half as hard as he thinks he does, this would have been over in the first, and I would have been happier. This is just low-level heavyweight MMA, and my position on that is fairly well established at this point. Jeff, you wanted to be nicer to Walt Harris. By all means, provide a counterpoint. I'm all ears.
Boom heavyweights.
I walked right into that. Pat, anything you want to... let me ask you a slightly more specific question. What is really wrong with Walt Harris's game? Because he's a big guy, and it's clear that he has a bit of power. I mean, anybody that size has some. So what is it that he's really kind of missing as far as putting things together? I mean, he got blown out by Fabricio Verdum. Fine. Like, Verdum's really good. Was it just the mental lapse when he fought Mark Godbeer? I mean, he got knocked out by Nikita Krylov, who's, been fighting at light heavyweight ever since. Like, what's kind of missing from this guy's game? What would you do to try and fix him?
I would immediately pull him out of the UFC because he's not ready to be fighting there, and I would literally just break him down back to complete basics and treat him as though he'd never fought before. Because, quite frankly, I don't know that he actually wants to fight. As soon as a fight turns into a fight, Walt Harris tends to check out if he's not in no danger. As soon as he's put in danger or seems to feel that way, the fight's over. Spitz here never put him in danger, never really did anything to threaten him. It was fought at a pace he liked, which is to say if they were moving any slower, they'd be going backwards. Just horrible, not action. And he got very, very fortunate that Spitz just stood directly in front of him, square, and tried to throw a leg kick in punching distance. And dropped his hands to do it. You can't be any dumber in a fight than that. You can't. So, I don't know where they found Spitz from, but I hope he goes back there. And again, with
Spitz
Harris...
knocked out Anthony Hamilton.
Yeah, so,
I mean, that's what actually happened, but it's meant as a joke.
Yeah. So, but with Harris, I don't know that Harris actually wants to fight. And I've never seen an indication that he's willing to be in a fight.
All right. Next up, this fight at least ended quickly. Two guys incredibly fortunate to be in the UFC, Ben Saunders and Jake Ellenberger. Ben Saunders defeats Ellenberger via TKO 156 of the first with a really nicely timed, more than placed. I mean, it was well placed as well, but the timing on the knee that Saunders landed to the body that just kind of crumpled Ellenberger was really nice. This is the, I believe, second 4-fight losing streak in the UFC for Jake Ellenberger. And Ben Saunders can beat guys at the level of Jake Ellenberger at this point.
That's three fights for Ellenberger, not 4.
Okay, it's a second 3-fight losing streak, excuse me. I mean, the last time they had to bust out Josh Koscheck to get him to break a 3-fight losing streak.
I mean, of his last 10 fights, he's only won 2 of them.
Yeah, he's 2-8 in his last 10.
2-8.
And aren't the two guys? Actually, I shouldn't say. I don't know that Matt Brown is officially retired.
He's not.
He unretired. He had announced he was retired. Yeah. He unretired. But yeah, they're over. Again, he beat Josh Koscheck in 2015, which means nothing. The Matt Brown win was legitimate. I mean, I don't want to detract from that one, but I mean, other than that, he's been finished in. I think he lost a decision to McDonald, and the Saffiedine fight was a decision. But other than that, of those 8 losses, he's been finished in 6 of those 8 losses, and his last 3 have been strike related. Pat, I'll stick with you for this one to start off. Then, I mean, again, like I liked the timing on the knee from Saunders because he caught Ellenberger as Ellenberger was breathing in, which is the worst time to get hit in the body. But, I mean, Ellenberger shouldn't be here anymore, and I really question how much longer we're going to have Ben Saunders around at the UFC level, too. But what were your thoughts on this?
This was one of those fights where going into it, either guy could have won, and it wouldn't have surprised me based on the flaws of both guys. I did favor Saunders because I think overall he's looked better. Not that that says a whole lot. But, Jake Ellenberger, despite breaking away from the Edmond Tarvedian camp, has long been damaged by what the time there did to him, and is at a point where he's not going to rebound from any of it. That's just how it is. The long-term damage done to his abilities by spending time in that camp, he's not going to fix it.
He was there for a while, too. That wasn't a quick one. That wasn't a one-and-done. Like, he was there for a couple of fights.
Yeah. That damage is not going to be fixed because he's taken too much punishment and is too far into his career to change that. He should not be fighting in the UFC. I question whether or not he should still be fighting, period, unless he wants to pick up some paychecks on smaller local shows, which is fine. But Jake's time in the UFC should have come to an end like 2 fights ago and hasn't, and he shouldn't be there right now. And I say that out of general concern for his health moving forward.
Yeah, Jeff?
This fight to me is why you kind of want to keep Ben Saunders around. He is a journeyman, but he's a good journeyman, and he's good for finishes and performances like this. And Robert, you needed a performance like this for this card, so I think you should be a little more grateful to Ben Saunders because he's the killer bee.
I'm grateful it didn't go longer.
I mean, well, you have Ben Saunders to thank for that. And I would say Jake Ellenberger, try to transition him to like a broadcaster role or an analyst role, just because
he's not good at those.
I think he does adequate.
Well, they had Kelvin Gastelum's mumbling all over that analyst desk.
If he still wants to be associated with the UFC, on some level. Other than that, he definitely does not belong. He's not a UFC caliber fighter.
Yeah.
UFC. I don't know why they've kept him around so much because I mean UFC has cut more talented fighters and prospects for less, and it always puzzles me like why are some fighters who are just not – they're on terrible losing streaks, or they just haven't looked good at all, stay on the roster, but other guys just get dropped like a bad habit. It's a little strange to me sometimes, but whatever.
It's very strange.
He's probably willing to fight for significantly less than other people are.
Like Paul Sass. That was a guy who had potential, had a couple losses. Like, give that guy one more fight instead of just dropping the guy. Like, that didn't make sense to me.
All right, next up, we had this wound up being the other kind of decent fight on the main card. Julio Arce defeated Daniel Tamer via submissions with a rear naked choke in the third round. Arce basically had his way with this fight. He did a good job of mitigating the leg kicks from Tamer. I was surprised at his ranginess, because I'd seen Arce's previous UFC fight. I don't believe this wasn't his UFC debut, I don't think. And he was a lot rangier than I remember him being.
Correct. He beat Dan Ige at UFC 220 in January.
Yeah. He moved well on the ground. I mean, the finishing sequence here was surprisingly slick from him. I'm trying to remember exactly how this worked. I remember what it was. It was the grip adjustments that kind of surprised me. He has the rear naked choke kind of locked up, but Tamer kept hand fighting, which is to his credit.
And then the Severn grip.
Yeah, I mean, he went from, the figure four to the Gable grip, back to the figure four, to the kind of the X grip. I mean, anytime Tamer was able to get a little bit of space in the choke, Arce just made an adjustment to how he was applying it until he finally got it locked up. And there's a lot of guys who don't do that. They go for one grip or one and then one straight into the other, and then they leave something open for hand fighting, and then they just lose the whole thing. So, again, I was impressed with that, and again, just kind of the fact that he was able to mitigate a lot of Tamer's kickboxing. So, this wound up being a surprisingly interesting fight for me. Jeff, what did you think about this one?
I thought it was a good win for Julio Arce. It had an impressive finishing sequence. No complaints here.
Pat, I want to give you the floor because you and I are part of at least one group chat, and we were kind of talking a little bit back and forth when this fight went down. What do you got here? Because I'll let you go ahead and drop it.
I'm loving Arce. I really like. This was my first exposure to him, but I loved what I saw from him. I was thrilled. I thought he, when this fight started, Tamer was opening up hard and often with leg kicks, but Arce, he did two things well when confronted with them. He started checking them to the point where the only part of Tamer's leg kicks that were landing on him were the foot area, which is where you don't want to land with the kick. And you could see that Tamer really did stop throwing them as soon as Arce started figuring out the range of it and where it would land and how he could just check his shin into Tamer's foot, which I loved. And then immediately, once a kick was thrown, he would change the angle and start controlling the distance with his jab and his kicks, which was really well done. And I love that he mixed up his attack. He was able to, I didn't like his corner advice in between rounds where they told him shoot for a takedown. He was winning the fight pretty handily standing up at that point, and so why change up what you're doing already so well and you can win with? Now, what he didn't do that. What he got was the opportunity granted to him basically when Tamer kind of just fell on a kick when Arce had his foot held, and then he was able to get a definitive top position and work his way there. He didn't risk, going into a takedown and then being clinched or reversed or what have you. He took advantage of an opportunity that presented itself and did it smartly, which I was impressed with. He had complete ground control, worked good ground and pound, and the finishing sequence that you talked about, Robert, where he initially had that figure four grip, which I don't ever like on a rear naked choke. I don't. When you're in a jiu-jitsu class, the way they tell you to work that choke is not to grip the back of your arm across the back of the head. They want you to use your back arm that's not around the throat to reach for your opposite shoulder. And it's really supposed to be a shoulder-to-shoulder grip with your hands when you're executing that choke. And the way it works is every time a breath exhales, your forearms and elbows are supposed to come closer and closer to touching. Now, that's not often possible when you're not wearing a gi to cheat and hang on to apply that choke. So in MMA, what tends to work better is the Gable, or in an MMA context, the Severn grip. Because Dan Severn's the guy who introduced us to that from a rear naked choke position. So when he transitioned to that and would get fought on it and not be able to control it, he immediately put pressure back on the head to make Tamer reach up and adjust his grip and open that one back up for him. I saw a lot of intelligent things from a very young guy that I don't see normally in MMA fighters. I saw him with a good toolbox at his disposal. I like what I see. In 3 years, this guy could potentially be a title contender.
All right. And kicking off the main card, we had an awful fight. Sam Alvey defeats John Vellante via split decision. Sam Alvey is in the wrong business, man. If this guy had anything...
Well, no, he's not. He has 10 UFC. He has 10 UFC wins.
Let me explain
he's
myself.
Not in the wrong business.
Hear him out, Jeff.
If he had anything approaching a defined physique, he would be in the WWE making more money because he is the most likable, affable, charismatic guy in the entire light heavyweight division. When that man talks and can communicate with the fans, I mean, everybody and their mother booed this fight. And then Sam Alvey starts talking and people become engaged. And again, like, he's been able to have a surprisingly good UFC run, considering that a lot of his fights look like this one. More than people remember. You remember the highlight reel knockouts because they're great. There's a lot of this in there as well. That's just not good. And if you put that guy in a position where he could maximize his communication skills and could, and then put on athletic displays to go along with that, that's really where I think he would be just a runaway success. As it stands, he's a decent attraction fighter because people like his personality enough to not remember the bad fights. I really don't have anything to say about the actual fight itself. It just wasn't good. There was a lot of plotting. John Vollante's not good. I don't have a whole lot beyond that to kind of go with here. Jeff, I'll start with you this time. What did you think about this fight? I mean, again, I like Sam Alvey as a personality. Not as a fighter.
The fight sucked. John Vellante, talk about guys that don't belong in the UFC.
Very true.
His last two fights, or his last several fights were horrible.
I can't think of a good one.
I mean, the only fights I think he was in that were good were the ones he got slept. Like when he got smashed by Tom Lawler, basically.
When he knocked out Anthony Perosh, I mean, it was only it was a 3-minute fight, but...
That was like 3.5 years ago, so or 2.5 years ago, excuse me. So there you go. I mean, Sam Alvey, he clearly knows how to connect with the audience and the fans. I don't really like watching his fights, but he's done well for himself considering he's not a very good fighter. So he might as well just make the most of it with the platform that he has. And then when the UFC finally does get tired of him, he'll hopefully have a few prospects going for him to do some stuff outside of MMA. But for now, I mean, as bad as his fights are, considering I would consider him below mid-level. But even being below mid-level, he has 10 wins in the octagon, and he has wins over Rashad Evans and Nate Marquardt. No, he did not beat those guys in their prime. He beat them well past their expiration dates. But he can say that now. I mean,
he's about to be a top 15 light heavyweight in all likelihood.
He
exactly.
will be after this. He just beat Volante,
exactly.
who was 15.
So, and again, I haven't really liked his fights particularly all that much, but and he always sort of talks about getting exciting fights and exciting finishes, and he never translates that into the actual fights. But I mean, he keeps winning.
He does.
Lose one, but then he'll win, and he'll keep winning. So he might, who am I to deny him, making the most of what of this opportunity he has, because the man, he's doing something right, even if it's just convincing the judges he wins an awful fight. He's doing something right, and all the power in the world to him, because, I mean, plenty of fighters who are great fighters can't even create that connection with the fans, and it doesn't ruin their careers, but it hurts their careers for sure.
Yeah,
Sam Alvey is just on the other side of that spectrum, where his fights are not really very good, and he doesn't really put it all together, but he oddly has that connection with the fans, even if they're booing the hell out of an awful fight. He manages to win him back over in the post-fight interview. And I don't know, I feel like more fighters could take a few notes on how to handle themselves in front of the cameras like Sam Alvey. Sam Alvey's he's just sort of like on that other side of the spectrum. But then he has a winning record in the UFC, and he's about to probably be ranked in the light heavyweight division. So there you go.
And probably will get the fight he asked for. He asked for Corey Anderson. I mean, I think that fight's terrible.
I mean, Corey Anderson. That's probably a very winnable fight for Corey Anderson of all people.
Oh, if I'm Anderson, I'm all over that.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Corey Anderson, I love that fight, especially when how is Corey? He had a win over Patrick Cummins, but he had a couple losses in there to Ovin Saepru and Jimmy Manoa. Yeah, Corey Anderson. You might as well just book that fight, because you have those guys under contract, and you know what? That'll probably be an awful fight, just based on.
Alternatively, Corey Anderson's suspect chin rears its ugly head and he gets face planted, which would be great too.
But all right, so there's that possibility, or it's probably a slow, dull, plotting fight like their other fights. But you have these guys under contract, so you might as well just book it. Put it on Fight Pass or whatever, and just call it a day.
Pat, your thoughts on this fight?
Sam Alvey doesn't do a whole lot. What Sam Alvey does is Sam Alvey hits really hard. And that's about it. That said, I like Sam Alvey, just like everybody else. He is able to build a connection with his audience that will get you to overlook terrible fights, because he's a genuinely nice guy who is happy to be where he is, who you like to see succeed. That said, the fact that he is in the top 15 at light heavyweight is more indicative of how bad light heavy is, rather than how possibly good Sam Alvey can be. If Sam Alvey were able to, say, add something to his repertoire, maybe if he found out he was really good at shooting double legs out of nowhere or something, there might be, a bit higher of a ceiling for Sam Alvey. But this is who Sam Alvey is. He comes in, he plods a lot, he backs off a lot, he doesn't throw a whole lot of punches. The ones he throws are hard and they're good. He just doesn't throw a whole lot of them. And he doesn't defend particularly well. And when he fights an upper-level guy, he loses. But
he's like a better Rashad Evans.
He's a more likable Rashad Evans.
Well, you could just say he's a likable Rashad Evans at that point. But
that's fair.
Yeah, but he's just one of those guys who, regardless of what you want to say, he wins. He doesn't win against very good opposition, but they're not booking him against good opposition all that frequently, probably because they know people like Sam Alvey and they want to keep him around So they're going to put him in these types of fights more often than not so they can justify keeping him around and keeping him winning to keep people happy and keep them watching.
Yeah,
It's like the Eddie Eagle of the UFC.
There you go.
all right. That was the main event. As for the prelims,
Oh, God, we have to talk about these?
I do. You only have to suffer vicariously. Believe me, I watched them all live.
Jeff, I don't feel that way alone, do I?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Sajara Eubanks defeated Lauren Murphy via unanimous decision, 230-27s, 129-28. She subsequently said, I would think I should fight for the belt. I laughed. Because you ain't leapfrogging Valentina off of this performance. David Tamer defeated Nick Lentz. This was the only somewhat interesting fight out of these four. David Tamer remains a really good example of a guy who knows how to fight while moving backwards, as opposed to guys who run away. If you ever find someone who doesn't understand the difference between, again, fighting while moving backwards and people who just won't engage, find some David Tamer footage, because this guy actually fights while moving backwards. And he's really kind of coming up in that division. I mean, beating Nick Lentz is no mean feat. Nick Lentz is... You beat Nick Lentz, you kind of know you're smarter than the average bear, so to say. And I've kind of come around on Tamer, so good for him. Bilal Muhammad defeated Chance Rencounter via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. Nothing of note here. Apart from Bilal Muhammad being kind of a madman willing to go through a training camp and then fight during Ramadan. I mean, when you're fighting the Chance Rencounters of the war, it's probably easier, but for those of you who don't know, followers of Islam who observe Ramadan for the month they fast from sun up to sundown. There's no food or water during that time. It's any athlete who performs during that time, even just like there are some NFL players who went through like spring training during Ramadan. It's insane. Desmond Green defeated Gleison Tebow via unanimous decision, 30-27 twice, 129-27. I know what Gleison Tebow wants out of life, I think. He wants one win. If Gleison Tebow wins one more fight, he has the most wins in UFC lightweight history, and then he will retire. Sadly, I don't think he's going to get it. Not a good fight. On Fight Pass, we had two kind of interesting occurrences. Nathaniel Wood defeated Johnny Eduardo via Darce choke in the second round. Horrible decision-making from Eduardo here, who kind of shot a bad single leg, pulled half guard. Wood moved out to front headlock position. And then Eduardo kept reaching for stuff, and every time he'd reach, Wood would kind of adjust his position a little bit and get closer to actually locking in the choke. Then he kind of got it locked up because Eduardo tried to roll under for a knee bar. And as he tried to roll, he just shortened everything up, and Wood reached all the way through with his grip, grabbed his own bicep, locked it up, rolled him over. That's all she wrote. And our hilarity for the evening, in the first fight, the other fight I was looking forward to because I'm loosely familiar with both guys, Jose Torres defeated Jared Brooks via knockout. This was a slam. But Jared Brooks knocked himself out with a slam. This was hilarious. He got Torres up for a double leg over one shoulder. And rather than simply take the easy takedown, he went for the big elevated, not even a side slam, a backward slam. If you've seen enough Japanese pro wrestling, you know what a beach break is, and absent this head spiking, this is kind of what he was going for. So he's got Torres up, and then he flops backward, trying to slam Torres onto his back, but Torres, kind of knowing this slam is coming, the whole time he's on Brooks' shoulder, he's adjusting so that he's parallel to Brooks instead of under him. So when Brooks throws himself backwards for the slam, he knocks himself out, slamming the back of his head into the mat. This was a good fight before the crazy finish. Some really good wrestling from Brooks. That's the majority of his game. I kind of like Jose Torres as a prospect for flyweight. So seeing him kind of, know what he has to work on going forward it was just hilarious. I got a huge laugh out of that. It was crazy. It was a good way to kick off the night, and sadly, it was basically the peak of the night until the main event. Anyway, out of that bit of fights, Jeff, do you have any burning desires? Anything you want to point out? Anything make
There were fights in a place.
Accurate statement. Pat, anything here? I mean, do you want to mock Jared Brooks for his terrible slam technique?
If you're going to go for a Northern Light suplex, at least try to hit the bridge and not your head.
There's actually, related to that, there was a Pancrase bout between Matt Hume and Ken Shamrock, where the finishing sequence was Ken actually hitting an honest-to-God Northern Lights, floating over and locking up a Kimura.
Yeah, but that fight was about as legitimate as, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's Pancrase, About half their stuff was a little dubious. Alright, that was, again, UFC Fight Night 131 from Friday evening. Thanks to anyone who happened to read and follow along. I don't know if anyone did. I mean, this was a weird card, badly promoted on an off night. But to anyone who did
in a
read
weird place.
Utica's not that weird.
Yes, it is.
Come on, they could have been in Buffalo.
People have heard of Buffalo. Nobody's heard of Utica.
I'd heard of Utica.
Utica, the only one that did.
I mean, I can tell you exactly why I'd heard of Utica, too.
The Simpsons?
The Simpsons joke.
Yeah, I figured. That's the only reason anybody knows Utica. Because of the Simpsons. Oh, no, that's steam from the steamed hams we're having. It's an expression. Really? From where? Upstate New York.
Really? I'm from Utica, and I've never heard it.
It's from Buffalo.
No, it was Utica. And then he said, no, Utica, no, it's an Albany expression.
Oh, that's right.
I love that short. I love that short so much. Anyway, yeah, I'd heard of it from something else, too. And I can't remember what it was now. Alright, anyway. So again, thanks to anyone who followed along. God bless you for doing so. This coming Friday, we have the UFC back on pay-per-view. They're in Chicago for UFC 225. Oh yeah, there was a heavyweight fight on the main card. That was the other one I was thinking of. Anyway.
Going to be the biggest fight of the year so far.
Which is an indictment on the year so far more than anything else, but... the main event is a darn good fight. I actually kind of like the first fight these two had. We have UFC middleweight champion Robert Whittaker going for his first official title defense after his interim title was promoted to full title following the Michael Bisping fiasco. And he is rematching the man he beat for the interim title, Cuban wrestling machine Yoel Romero. I liked the first fight these two guys had. It was really interesting. I loved Whittaker's adjustments after his leg got destroyed in the first 2 rounds. I'm a big fan of both of these guys. I have a really hard time seeing what Romero can do differently to actually affect the outcome. Now, there's a couple of things I imagine he's going to do differently than he did in their first fight. One is energy management. He went for so many takedowns in those first 2 rounds. I mean, the pace he pushed, even if he wasn't a guy with some historical gas tank issues, the pace he has in the first 2 rounds is pretty crazy either way. I imagine he'll be more economical this time, but all that does is give the superior kickboxer, in this case Robert Whittaker, more opportunities to do basically what he did the first time, which was just give him a kickboxing lesson in real time. I am certainly not going to count out Yoel Romero. The man is an athletic freak. He has incredible power. His explosion is, again, otherworldly. But I have a very hard time imagining this fight going all that differently in terms of outcome from how their first fight went. I think Robert Whittaker wins. And if Romero takes the same kind of approach he took with Luke Rockhold in terms of his pacing, I think Whitaker finishes him. I just think that pace and that style, while it was able to kind of work through the kick-heavy offensive game of Luke Rockhold and mitigate the low kicks, and then kind of mess around with his jab, and then close distance and clobber him from time to time, Robert Whitaker doesn't react badly when you pressure him the way Romero does from time to time. He knows how to defend himself, and then he knows how to make you pay for it. I like Whitaker here. I like Whitaker for kind of the foreseeable future. I might have to really take a good hard look at middleweight going down further, but because Kelvin Gastelum's probably your next pseudo-contender, and I really like Whitaker against Gastelum. But I got Bobby Knuckles here. I like Romero, generally speaking, but this matchup just does not really favor him in a whole lot of areas. Pat, I'll start with you for this one, because you're a big fan of both of these guys. How do you see this playing out?
I still favor Robert Whitaker. I think the things he does well are very much troublesome for Romero being able to get a fight plan off the ground. I think he was impressive in being able to fight off Romero's wrestling in the first fight. And again, as soon as he needed to make adjustments when his leg was really giving out on him, the fact that he was able to do it and execute it and control the fight from that point on is outstanding on every level. Now, you asked if there's anything Romero can do differently in this fight. There is. And it's going to sound crazy, but it's one that it's something that he can pull off if he does correctly. He needs to utilize takedown attempts and angle cutoffs to set up his own striking. Now, that seems crazy. Why does he want to strike with Robert Whitaker? It's very simple. If he is able to at least land, he's not going to land on par with Whitaker. He doesn't have the technique. He doesn't have the distance management. He doesn't have those things. What he does have are heavy hands, and he's got outstanding athleticism that let him pull off kicks and knees from places he really shouldn't. Now, are you taking that as me telling you he's going to win this fight in a kickboxing war? No, absolutely not. But if he is landing enough through the first 2 rounds that he is able to make Whitaker respect his hands and his feet, what that will allow him to do is secure takedowns more effectively because he has Whitaker preoccupied with what else he's doing. And if you can put Robert Whitaker on the defensive, he's not inept, but he's certainly not as comfortable as when he's controlling the pace and doing more feinting and making you react than vice versa. If Romero is able to be a live threat with his hands and feet actively and is able to get takedowns later in the fight where he can control things, then he potentially can close out strong enough to win this fight on points. Or if he really gets an advantageous position, we've seen some vicious ground and pound from Romero.
Oh, God, the elbows he knocked out Machida with.
Yeah,
horrific.
That was graphic. So if he can put somebody in position where he's able to go off like that, there's not a lot of people who are going to be able to survive that. I'm not saying Whitaker can't, but you don't want to be there. And if Romero's on top and doing that, your odds of surviving, no matter who you are not good because of how good he is. Now, that's a very easy thing to say in terms of how to fight out that fight. It's very difficult to do. So I'm still favoring Robert Whitaker. I'm actually favoring him to get a finish in this fight. Late, probably the 5th round, because I think he'll have cut a pace, landed enough strikes, and mixed up his offense to the point where Romero is going to be very tired and very desperate late and try to do something and not be able to pull the trigger without putting himself in position to get finished. But I think if Romero does what I just laid out for him, there's a very good chance he can win this fight.
All right, Jeff, how do you see this one going? I mean, I think we're all kind of on the same page here because we're all big fans of one Bobby Q Knuckles.
It's weird because, while we're all, I'm all for Bobby Knuckles here. just like the first fight. And picking against Robert Whittaker in the past has never done me wrong.
That man
What's
has made me
strange?
look stupid on more than one occasion picking against
He
him.
did. I think the one time he did that was against Jacare. But what's strange to me is that he was the underdog in the first fight, and I definitely had him on the first fight, like hard Bobby Knuckles on the first fight. He was the underdog that fight, and he's the betting underdog for this fight, which is very strange to me.
If you can find someone listing Robert Whittaker as the underdog, that I would take that. If you're a betting person, I would take that.
And the reason it bothers me, I mean, I know they're just betting odds, but I feel like on merit alone, I feel like Whittaker should be the easy favorite. Should
I
he
would
not?
guarantee you.
It's the layoff more than anything in
Yeah,
this instance.
I would guarantee you it's the layoff and what caused the layoff with being the illness.
Yeah.
Okay. Now look, the layoff and the illness definitely gives me concern here. But it's not enough to sway me away from picking Whittaker either, because it's not. Let's see, it's just under it's under 1 year, so it's almost a year, and that can be a year turnaround can be pretty average for high level fighters in many cases. And Romero has only been slightly more. Let's see, since that.
Romero's only fought once since then.
He's only fought once, so he's been the more active fighter, but only slightly more active. So there's that. Romero. My biggest problem with the first fight was that Romero took a whole round off, and that cost him big time. And I don't think I've ever seen Whittaker intentionally take a round off in his career, like intentionally just try and hang back and let the clock run out. Whittaker's transformation into a champion has been amazing, because he came in from the Ultimate Fighter. I thought he was a fairly average mid-level welterweight. He had some wins, and then he moved up considering at a time when you always see fighters try to move down. And he had a stunning turnaround where he suddenly emerged as one of the top middleweights in the world, and now you can't really dispute that at this point. I
think he's the best.
I mean, Michael Bisping, and I like Michael Bisping, but he is lucky that fight with Whittaker never happened, because I truly believe, and I don't even like to say what ifs, but I truly believe if Michael Bisping fought Whittaker, Whittaker was going to eat him alive, and he would have probably taken all of his eyesight away.
Well, and
that's
how
highly I think of Robert Whittaker.
The other thing about that is, if that fight goes down, it was supposed to happen in Australia.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't happen, and because it didn't happen, Bisping was, I believe, available to step in to fight Luke Rockhold on short notice.
Right.
I mean, so the fact that fight didn't happen actually just straight paved the way for Bisping's title reign, such as it was.
But I mean, Whittaker still. Even though I'm not happy with how it turned out, he still ultimately became the champion. He did it by beating Romero in a tough fight, and now he's facing Romero again.
He beat Jacare and Romero back-to-back. Nobody beat a better level of competition in all of 2017.
The reason I like Whittaker is because his kickboxing is exceptional. But not just the kickboxing, he's able to deal with the wrestling of a Yoel Romero. And that says something, I think, about Whittaker's skill level and his abilities and his mental toughness to be able to go in there 5 rounds with a genetic freak like Romero, who's an Olympic-level athlete and a top contender. Even though Romero, I mean, he's getting up there in age, but I mean, we haven't really seen him slow down much at all. So, yeah, Robert Whittaker. Probably by decision, going with Whittaker.
All right. On for the co-main event, a fight I have profoundly soured on over the last 3 to 4 days. For the interim welterweight championship, which is utterly unnecessary.
The boo-boo title.
I mean, Tyron Woodley is going to be ready to schedule another fight like 2
in
weeks
August.
after the almost immediately after this fight. Like, it's so stupid. It's so profoundly stupid. But we have Rafael dos Anjos, who is trying to become a two-division champion. It's only interim, but he would technically be a two-division champion as he takes on Colby Covington.
Well, that's good for you, Robert, because, I mean, even though he didn't turn out to be the greatest lightweight fighter ever, that says a lot about your sort of prediction there that he was able to come to this level.
No, he's a really good fighter. I mean, if you go back to the 4-year run he's been on, his only losses are to Khabib, Eddie Alvarez, and Tony Ferguson.
And to be fair, the Alvarez and Ferguson losses, he was really struggling to make 155. It was killing him.
He said, Pat, to that point, he told reporters in the luncheon for this fight that he passed out 3 times during the weight cut for Alvarez. I don't know if that's true.
Buy it.
I don't know if that's true, but that's what he said. So
I believe it. And even with that,
is it any wonder? Is it any wonder he got knocked out in that fight?
No, and then
really.
just to bolster that, you look at what he's doing against much naturally bigger guys than Alvarez, and he's not being he's not losing any strength against them. He just looked better than ever in his last 3 fights.
I think that fight, Robbie Lawler, that fight should have been a finish, I think.
These are all, and again, it's not as if he's fighting, no-name welterweights to test the waters. He's fighting guys who've been successful at welterweight, and Saffiedine on a smaller scale, obviously, he's not a world beater in the UFC, but at one point in time, he was the Strikeforce champion. He did beat guys.
You're hard-pressed to find a better barometer about the success you could have in that division than to fight Tarek Saffiedine.
Yeah, and then Magny, who he ran through like a buzzsaw, and Lawler, who he completely dominated.
Yeah, and, I mean, one of the things that's crazy about that Tony Ferguson fight, I mean, not only the tough weight cut, he fought basically at Tony Ferguson's pace for 5 rounds in Mexico City and was not gassed. I mean, the fact that Tony came out of that, like, still dancing and, I mean, Tony's conditioning is, I don't know how to say this without, like, implicating something that I can't support, but if they have discovered some drug for cardiovascular conditioning, Tony's on it, because that's
called blood doping.
That's the only way that makes sense, because his conditioning is so good. I mean, that pace from that fight at that altitude is crazy. It's just crazy. Now the reason
Tony trains at high altitude, doesn't he?
Big Bear
typically,
Big Bear is his primary camp, I seem to recall. Which
isn't that a high altitude?
For California, I'd have to double check. I mean, like you also do have to remember I live in Utah.
It's not Mexico altitude. Big Bear, though, that training camp is used because it is at elevation in California. I forget what the actual footage is, but it's not comparable to the Rockies, but it's slightly less.
Yeah, it's nothing to sneeze at.
Anyway, I'm going with Dos Anjos here all the way. Dos Anjos continues his rise up the ranks and wins the Boo Boo title. First Brazilian to win a UFC lightweight title and a UFC Boo Boo title.
Yeah, here's why I've soured on this fight. There's only 2 ways this goes. And I don't say that very often, but there's really only 2 ways this goes. Because Colby Covington does exactly one thing. He wrestles you. His striking is bad. He got outstruck by Damian Maia for 7 minutes. I mean, let that sink in. That was horrible.
God, what a terrible fight.
It was. It really was. What he does is tries to get close, clinch you, get a full body lock, double leg, you pop back up, he switches to your back, he switches from the back to the double leg, repeat ad nauseum. This is what he does. RDA can be out-wrestled. In fact, this is the first strong wrestler he's fought probably since the Khabib fight. Let me double-check that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, unless you consider Ben Henderson, but I don't.
I would, sort of. I mean, Ben didn't try to wrestle him much in that fight, and I certainly wouldn't consider the style of wrestling from Benson to be the same as Colby or Khabib?
Benson was a way better fighter in his prime.
Oh yeah, this is just about the style. It's not saying that Benson's not. Benson's a good fighter. Certainly at that point in time, he still was as well. But if you look at the last, since the Khabib fight, Colby is by far and away the best wrestler he's had to face. Especially the real grinding, hang on you, fight in the clinch, drag you back down, miserable style. And because that's Khabib's style as well. Khabib's more exciting about it and has ferocious ground and pound, whereas Covington doesn't.
But this fight is 5 rounds and not 3.
Yeah,
so
this entire
that works
thing,
in Rafael's favor, I think.
Significantly. This entire thing for me boils down to whether or not Dos Anjos is able to keep distance and disengage and fight in the clinch against Colby Covington.
Here's part of what's interesting about that, though. Okay, in the fight with Maia, when Covington had to stand and strike, he didn't.
It was hilariously bad.
No, I'm not saying he didn't strike. I'm saying he didn't have to stand and strike. He made himself have to stand and strike because of his lack of recognition of the situations. And say what you want to about Damian Maia. Damian Maia will let you take him down. He will let you.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're a good wrestler, he will absolutely let you because he would rather be in your guard with you on top of him, potentially pounding him from the top, than he would standing up tall with you and having to kickbox with you. He'd much rather that. And Covington gave that to him. And Covington got busted up partly by Damian Maia.
I know. It was hilarious. No, you got outstruck by Damian Maia.
So say what you want to about Covington and his wrestling. He can wrestle.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't impress me against Maia in that respect because he really didn't.
He was very conscientious of the fact that if I go to the ground with Maia, even if I'm on top, I'm in serious trouble.
And here's part of the problem with that. He didn't have anything besides that to offer, and he got busted up by a guy who can't punch, who can't kick, can't throw elbows, can't knee, doesn't know how to measure distance when standing. He's going to fight a guy who does all of the above. And on top of that, is not terrible off of his back if he does get there. He's competently able to defend himself and get back to a standing position. And I'm not saying he's going to out-wrestle Covington. I'm not saying he's a better straight-up grappler than Covington. But if he does find himself on his back, he's not in a situation where he's going to lose the fight because of that. Okay, Covington, he hasn't really finished anybody of any note. I think he got to finish, let's look
here. He TKO'd Max Griffin in 2016, and
he's gone the distance in every fight since, if I'm not mistaken. One with Sun Gun, and one with Maia, and I think there was another one in there. Brian Barberena, that was the other one. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to beat Rafael, unless you're Tony Ferguson cutting some incredible pace, or Khabib, who is the best active grappler that there is, you better do something to finish him. Because if you let him stay in the fight, he's going to find a way to hit you and hurt you. And if Damian Maia can hurt you, you know damn well Rafael Dos Anjos can finish you.
Yeah, I'm picking Dos Anjos. I do want to say I will not be shocked if Covington does just out-wrestle him for 5 rounds. That will not shock me. I will then get to look forward to... You know what? If Covington wins and gets a title fight with Tyron Woodley, what's the over-under on him saying something horribly racist and just getting cut for it?
He won't get cut. He will say something horribly racist, and they'll say he had Ambien on him.
God. I actually buy that excuse from Roseanne, by the way, for the record, because she's crazy anyway.
Jim Ross does.
I mean, look, Ambien...
Jim Ross has also taken Ambien a time or two.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ambien will screw you up. And when you're already the type of person who has the issues that Roseanne does and is...
Right.
She's also very open about
Just stay off Twitter. Just stay off Twitter when you do that.
Like, lock your phone up. But
exactly.
Anyway.
Just call your agent. I need an ambient companion. Don't let me touch a computer for such and such time.
No, yeah, Ambien really does. You do weird stuff on that, like that.
Sometimes you take it with the intention of doing weird stuff.
Also true. Hence the JR reference.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this about this fight. I respect Colby Covington because he found the recipe to the secret sauce, and he talked his way into a UFC title fight. And you know what? I got to respect the moxie on something like that, because a lot of fighters who I think should be in that position, who are better than Colby Covington, won't do that at all. And I think, I mean, I understand if they don't want to do that because they don't feel like it's them. But if you just did that a little bit, you could start getting more of the fights you wanted, and you could probably get paid. I'm not saying it's ideal or it's fair, but I mean, you know, life isn't fair sometimes.
Yeah.
Ah,
do you want?
damn.
It's like, look, do you want to be professional? Do you want to be? I mean,
do you want to be an effing fighter?
Yeah, I mean, kinda. I mean, look, do you think Conor McGregor? Are you really going to tell me none of that persona is manufactured? Of course it is. Chael Sonnen, half of what he does is manufactured. Muhammad Ali. And look, I'm not trying to the comparison here is Muhammad Ali. People did not start caring about Muhammad Ali until he took the name Muhammad Ali, his real name. His birth name was Cassius Clay. He won an Olympic gold medal, and no one cared. And that pissed him off. So he saw Gorgeous George. He adapted the personality of a professional wrestler. He took on the name Muhammad Ali. He created a character and persona. I'm not saying some of that. Yes, of course, some of that's him, and some of that's organic. But he still created.
That as Cassius Clay.
What was that?
He did that as Cassius Clay.
He did. But I think there's actually a really clear point of delineation in his career when he started talking versus when he didn't. And look, I think it's right before the Sonny Liston rematch.
He crafted
I'll
a persona.
I'll defer to Pat on the
He
boxing
crafted a
history
persona
there.
for the public, and the public goes nuts. Colby Covington, all he's doing, he's clearly doing all this garbage for the cameras, but it worked. It worked. Now he's in a co-main event, and he's fighting for a UFC. Yeah, it's a boo-boo UFC title. It's a boo-boo title. Yes, it's fake. But that's not what his paycheck says.
If he wins, it certainly won't be. I did get a serious laugh out of him saying, "I'm going to jump on my private jet." Yeah, sure, buddy.
All these fighters complain about, like, they go on MMA Junkie or Errol Hawani, and they're always complaining about their placement on the card, blah blah blah. But when they get the microphone, when Joe Rogan's in front of them and he's got the mic in front of you, they're like, "Oh, I'll fight whoever the UFC wants me to." Okay, yeah, thanks for coming. You know, it's like a deer in the headlights. But then the next day they go on the MMA Hour and they're constantly
complaining. I thank the city.
I'd
like to thank all the fans for coming out, my coaches, my significant other.
And look,
my opponent was a good opponent. He did X, Y, and Z. This went my way.
Exactly.
Here's my after party, and I'll fight whoever the UFC wants me to fight. I got so sick of hearing that basic same script over and over again.
I have Sean Shelby and Dana White. I feel good.
And I have some sympathy for that, but my sympathy
talking after a fight that sucks. Like that's a hard thing to do. But
it only goes so far, you know? Like Ryan Bader, Ryan Bader, he's confronting Daniel Cormier in a press conference. He fought the same night Daniel Cormier was fighting for the title. And he won a fight against Rashad Evans. Yeah, it was Rashad Evans at the time, but he was on a winning streak. He gets the Joe Rogan time. That's premium airtime, and he didn't say jack slack. You know, I mean, like, Ryan Bader, if you want to fight for the title, go out and get it, you know? Because the point is, the UFC isn't just going to give it to you unless you do something crazy. I'm not saying throw a dolly cart through a window, but yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe take some footage with some porn stars and start ticking people off. Because I'm not saying it's real, and I'm not saying it's not garbage, but it works. It makes the fans listen. It makes the fans
Is that what
hate
Covington's
you or want
been
to see
doing?
you get. Yeah, it works. Do you want to get? I mean, look. Do you want to get paid and go to Bellator, or yeah, whatever. That's all I'm saying.
Ah, damn, Boucher won. Sorry, utterly random. The IBJJF Worlds are ongoing.
And the Astros are getting creamed by the Red Sox right now, so F all.
No, yeah, Boucher is now the 11-time IBJJ World Champion. Can't believe Lowe let him have that. Sorry. Jiu-Jitsu talk.
That's all right. If Jiu-Jitsu is hard, they'd call it Sambo.
Oh, yeah, they actually did stream the Sambo World Championships on YouTube earlier this year. It was great. Anyway, Pat, you gave me your thoughts. Okay, let's move on to the next fight. We have a women's featherweight bout where theoretical number one bantamweight contender Holly Holm. That division is... God. Welcomes Megan Anderson into the UFC. I don't have a whole lot here. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Holly's career across both boxing and MMA. I also think she's very close to the end of it. I mean, she's been fighting for years and years and years. She's just, not really at her physical peak anymore. She's only 1-4 in her last 5, excuse me. Now, granted, one of those I thought was a bogus decision, but the others were legitimate. I mean, she got choked out by Miesha Tate. She lost to Shevchenko. I scored the Durandame fight for her, and she clearly knocked out Betch Correia, but she lost to Chris Cyborg pretty definitively. I mean, we're just a couple of fights away from her just being done, which is fine. I mean, she's been fighting... Oh, good grief. Her first professional boxing bout was in 2002.
Yep.
Man, I was still in high school. I mean, again, this years, injuries, it all adds up. We're just closing in on the end of her career. And the UFC really kind of needs Megan Anderson to win this fight. Because it lets you set up Anderson and Cyborg. And Megan's a really good fighter. She lost her professional debut via majority decision. She lost her Invicta debut when she just got sloppy in the guard of Cindy Dandois. And much as Cindy Dandois sucks everywhere else, she's a competent grappler. I mean, she went on to finish her next 4 fights, pretty violently, actually. She hasn't fought since January of 17, so about a year and a half. Again, I'm picking... This is an incredibly speculative pick on my part, because I won't be surprised if Anderson just can't actually adapt to Holly's range. But Megan's at least a natural featherweight instead of a blown-up bantamweight. And again, I'm going with Anderson. This is, again, very speculative on my part because she could very easily lose this fight, and then we're just still not sure what to do with Cyborg. But, yeah, again, that's kind of contrary to elements of how I think the fight's going to go, but I don't mind taking at least one of those a card or so. Pat, how do you see this one going?
I favor Megan Anderson. I know that Megan Anderson has not beaten necessarily the most incredible competition when she was in Invicta. And it's been, I think at least a year and a half since we saw her when all this stuff went on, when she was supposed to come in and fight and couldn't. And, we had all those personal issues or whatever they were. Stopping the Cyborg fight from happening. I still favor Megan Anderson for a lot of the things we've talked about Holly. You're talking to someone who's on the tail end of a near 20-year combat sports career against someone who she's giving up size to, who is very competent as a whole as a fighter, other than if you jump into someone's guard disrespectfully who's good at jiu-jitsu, and Holly's not that person. I'm not saying Holly can't win, but if I'm picking here, I'm leaning towards Megan Anderson because firstly, I think she's got a lot more to prove. And now that Cyborg has really been firmly established as the woman to fight, it's one of those things where you have to want to fight her at this point. You have to want to fight her if you're worth anything as a fighter. And I don't know. I've gone back and forth on this one for a lot of reasons. I can see Holly winning this. I just don't. This is one where if I'm betting, I'd have to get really good odds one way or another to pick someone. And I would be more inclined to bet on Megan Anderson. If anything's going to hurt her to me, it's going to be the layoff. And I actually think she benefits from this being a 3-round fight as opposed to a 5-round fight. Because for all Holly's faults, cardiovascular conditioning is not one of them. And I think she would be better off suited going to 5 rounds here than Megan Anderson would. But I'll take Megan via decision in a fight where she doesn't bite on Holly's charges and straight line rushes so much and forces Holly to kind of fight at odd angles the way Valentina did.
All right, Jeff?
I don't know what... I can't explain it fully, but I'm leaning toward Holly here. Is it Megan or Megan?
Megan.
Megan. I'm just not totally sold on Megan Anderson. Maybe I just need to see how she's going to react in this fight. And while I haven't been the biggest fan of Holly Holm on this podcast, at least, I mean, I think she did better than I expected against Cyborg. She didn't win that fight, but I think she was surprisingly competitive. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I think Holly Holm is generally... I mean, her kickboxing is very good, and I think she's very good when her opponent isn't pushing the pace against her or being aggressive. She's good at maintaining distance, so I think that might work in her favor. Holly Holm. I think gun to my head, Holly Holm.
All right. Next up, we have a heavyweight fight, one of two on this entire card. Andrei Arlovsky finally fighting in his adopted home of Chicago. Andrei Arlovsky, who I can't for the life of me figure out.
Neither can he.
I mean, he was on a 5-fight losing streak, was finished in 4 of them, fights a guy that I actually had some hopes for. I mean, that guy, Junior Albini, who just turns out nope. I was way off on that guy. Beats him, has a terrible fight, but beats Stefan Struve, which I don't think means anything in 2018, but he did it. And he's fighting another young, up-and-coming heavyweight, in this time in the form of Tai Tuivasa. Tuivasa is 7-0, for those of you unfamiliar with him. He's 2-0 in the UFC. He has finished all of his opponents.
In the first round.
In the first round. I mean, his longest one was the Rashad Coulter fight, which went... No, he had one stop between rounds 1 and 2. But yeah, when he beat James McSweeney, McSweeney's corner stopped it between rounds 1 and 2. 5-2 pro boxing record. I'm struggling here just because Andrei Arlovsky has this weird way of kind of turning things on their head at the oddest possible time. But I really don't like his chances here. He's fighting a guy who is younger, who hits very hard, who's dynamic as far as heavyweights go, and who's a bit of a wild man. I mean, Andre really, he's kind of adapted over the last little bit, and I think that's because is he with TriStar now? I forget where he is at the moment. He's bounced around a lot over the years. But I think he's going to try and wrestle Tuivasa rather than stand and strike with him because...
I think he's ATT now. I think he was with Jackson for a little bit, and now I think he's at ATT.
Might be. I mean, he's trained everywhere. That guy is like, he's like the MMA version of Forrest Gump. He's literally just been everywhere. I really like Tuivasa here. He's wild, but he's powerful, and when I say wild, it's not sloppy or stupid. He knows he's a wild fighter. I mean, Tony Ferguson's a wild fighter. Hasn't stopped it. It's actually helped his success in many respects because he knows how to harness it. Now, Tuivasa's not nearly as polished as Tony Ferguson is, but the same principle is there. I like Tuivasa here. I think he gets a big win, and, I mean, goes back to developing more slowly, but this is a big name that he's going to knock off here. Jeff, is Andrei Arlovsky's improbable third or fourth career resurgence going to continue here?
I would say no, but stranger things have happened in this sport, so I don't want to eliminate that completely. What's happening is pretty obvious here for those, the UFC is hoping to build up Tuivasa as a future thing. Arlovsky, they weren't good fights, but he's coming off 2 wins here, unlike Alistair Overeem. So they're hoping that Tuivasa will Arlovsky, and then they can pump up and build up Tuivasa as a future contender, which heavyweight desperately needs right now. And even though Tuivasa is still
he's young in the sport and in real life.
He's young in the sport and
he's 25.
In real life. Well, look, he's 3-0 in the UFC, 7-0 overall. But when you're fighting at heavyweight, that practically makes you a top 5 title contender. Am I wrong here, Robert?
Not really.
So he, I bet you right now, Arlovsky is ranked in the top 10 without even looking at the rankings.
Oh yeah,
and he's number 9. So think about this: this 25-year-old kid, he beats Arlovsky. He's 8 fights into his MMA career, 4 fights into his UFC career. He's in the top 10.
Yep.
So that's what the UFC is hoping for here, and that's why this fight is on the main card. They're desperately hoping that Tuivasa sleeps Arlovsky just like Ngannou did, and Stipe Miocic.
Pat, how do you think about that? I'm curious as to your impressions of Tuivasa. You've got a pretty good handle on, what fighters are good at and what they're not. So, what do you think of him?
Tuivasa's fun. Tuivasa's a fun guy. He's the unofficial spiritual successor to Mark Hunt, who is pretty much on the way out at this point. So along needed to come another, Polynesian, Australian, South Pacific Islander who knocks people out. Doesn't look like the poster boy for muscle and fitness, but doesn't need to be. He has deceptively fast hands for a guy his size. And I think that's what's going to make the difference here with Andre. Andre, yes, he is shown in the past at times to have a weird kind of, he can take a punch in this fight, but he can't take one in the next type of mentality. And that's the only answer. It's all mental with Andre. We've all known that for a long time. But when Andre gets clipped fast and often, he really has problems. And I think he's going to get into Tuivasa's range, and Tuivasa will let his hands fly, and Andre will get clipped and not know how to deal with it and get stopped. By all rights, Andre should go in there looking to double leg, looking to single leg, looking to get this fight to the ground where he potentially would have a pronounced advantage. But that's not Andre, and I would not be surprised to see this end in the first 30 seconds.
I hope so.
I like Tuivasa. I like him heavy here.
All right, and kicking off the main card because the UFC is desperate to sell pay-per-views. That is the only reason. Dana, this is stated. This is not just speculation on my part. This is the stated reason for this fight being on the card. CM Punk makes his second ever professional appearance, and he takes on Mike Jackson. Pat, I have nothing to say technically about this fight. I mean, this is not the type of fight that should be in the UFC. I don't think there's any reasonable dispute over this. Is this the first time in the modern era of the UFC that 2 guys without a professional win are fighting in the UFC?
Yeah, I believe it is. And first of all, this is the lead off on the pay-per-view card, which means none of us win either.
Yeah.
These are two guys who are clearly not UFC caliber. They don't do anything well in a fighting perspective.
The fight's at welterweight.
Yeah.
Which it still baffles me that Punk's doing that. I mean, that he looks so. I mean, this is not a guy who's ever been a physical specimen, but the weigh-in photos from him from his last fight were just so bad.
I don't get it.
Yeah,
I mean,
he was completely gaunt, no muscle on him, just skin and bones, and he's choosing to do this again. Why, I don't know.
Think he misses weight?
No.
I mean, his last fight was before the early morning weigh-ins.
I really don't think he misses weight. And he's been doing a lot of sweating in the courtroom with Dr. Amon, so there's that to help out.
That's another thing. Is that going to? I mean, to have that weighing on you right before you go into a cage and fight, well, whatever, with someone.
He's too much of an idiot to have that weigh on him the way it should.
He's entirely.
You really don't like CM Punk, Pat.
No, I really don't, and I have every reason not to.
Look, even if you are a CM Punk fan, I simply think he's entirely too convinced he's in the right on that case to let it actually affect his mentality about the fight.
He's just supremely, stupidly self-confident in that regard. That this is not a worry to him, and literally every day he's gone to the trial. If you followed it, he's literally laughing outside with Colt Cabana every morning. And not taking anything particularly seriously during it. And
when he cried on the stand, do you think that was crocodile tears?
I think it was Crocodile Dundee tears.
All right.
That's a breakdown. That's a breakdown.
Oh, damn it, Rob! I lost my train of thought.
Worth it.
No, listen. These are two guys who don't have any business fighting professionally at the moment, let alone fighting professionally in the top organization in the world in mixed martial arts. We all know what this is. This is a UFC cash grab because you can, at least at this point in time, make some money off of CM Punk's name, which is fine. Mike Jackson is literally in there because there may be the potential that he's so bad Punk can actually beat him.
I mean,
which is
unless
fair.
They wanted to bring in another guy who was, 1 or 2-0.
Honestly, though, this is who Punk really should have been fighting in his first fight.
He should be fighting. Look, if Punk wants to fight, and I'm not saying he shouldn't, this is the type of fighter he should be fighting on a regional show.
Right.
I mean, and in all fairness, I know that.
That fight with Mickey Gall was a death sentence. That was a death sentence for Punk.
Here's my thing. My thing about that is, there was no chance he was ever going to win that fight, given Gall's youth and actual competitive background. But Gall was only 2-0, and if you watch a lot of and again, I've said this before, there is regional MMA all around you. You're probably not aware of it. I mean, again, I live in Utah. There are two. There are two semi-regular MMA promotions that run within an hour of drive, within an hour's one-way drive time of where I sit right now. And if you watch,
California at one point had like 9 that were active full time.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch that level of MMA, and there's nothing wrong with watching it. I've watched it. I still do sometimes. You see fights like CM Punk versus Mickey Gall. You see, a 1-0 or 2-0 against an 0-0, an 0-1, and they tend to look one of two ways. They look like the Punk and Gall fight did, where one guy actually kind of knows what he's doing, and the other guy doesn't. Or they look like this is going to look, like two guys who kind of don't know what they're doing. And I still think drags everything down.
And I still think Mike Jackson is going to win.
Honestly, I think he's a lunatic, but I think Jason David Frank probably would have wiped the floor with Punk too.
Well, Jason David Frank has been a competitive martial artist.
And that's why I say that. I think Joe Rogan, I think Taekwondo Joe probably would have done the same.
Oh, Joe would have killed him.
I think Joe would have slept him with either leg kicks alone, or would have just put him on the ground and destroyed him.
Yeah, for those of you who have never actually seen Joe Rogan, and you only know him as a commentator, look up his early when he was a kid, early teens. He did a lot of Taekwondo competitions and was very good.
He started out as a martial artist. He got into comedy as a side and acting as a side thing.
Yeah, he got into comedy when he decided he didn't want to really go for the Olympic Taekwondo team. I mean, Joe Rogan's kicks are insanely. And you would never know it if you just know his reputation. But there's plenty of training footage of him, even recent stuff of him kicking, and that man kicks like a mule.
Yeah, but he's a lifelong martial artist.
Oh yeah.
He's, as you said, he's been doing it since he's a kid. Punk has only.
He's a lifelong professional wrestler. And that's
right.
Not to demean that in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
And not the same thing. George Hackenschmidt, not the George Hackenschmidt, Frank Gotch professional wrestler where it's catch wrestling and it's legitimate. Not even a century later where there were guys like Stu Hart around who could legitimately stretch people and hold their own. No, it's not. He's not. He was never that kind of professional wrestler. He never was. He never would be. He's a guy who made a name for himself in that industry, which is great, and he's using that to live out, a weird, sick fantasy of getting pulverized. And he's doing
I just really hope he's not giving Duke Rufus any money.
Of course he is. And Duke Rufus is telling him, man, you know what? Your kicks are looking as good as my brother's. I don't know.
Which is if I'm Duke's brother, I'm driving down there and slapping him. Like, for those of you unaware of the history of the Rufus brothers, they were legitimately great kickboxers.
But I mean, I can't. I mean, if I'm
Ben Askren hit him with a stunner when they were supposed to be rolling. Come on.
In fairness, that was probably legit because Ben Askren's. If Ben Askren rolling with CM Punk decided, you know what, I want to see if I can make a stunner work, Ben Askren is going to see if he can make a stunner work.
I just can't see why this fight needs to happen at welterweight though either.
That's where Punk wants to fight, and I think part of it is they've convinced him that that's his optimal weight.
Who? Like who? Duke Rufus or the UFC?
Well, hear me out. Hear me out. Punk is a guy who probably legitimately walked around at about 190 pounds, but you have to remember, Punk is not a guy who binges on alcohol at any point. He's constantly doing road work even on his working days. It's known that he likes to jog, 5 miles or so in the course of a day. So he's not your typical athlete who's not going to do road work and stuff over a long period of time, and he's working every night.
No, his walk-around weight is not the same as the walk-around weight of the average fighter.
So, all right, when WWE billed him as 218 or whatever, do you think that was illegit? Do you think that was jumped up?
At best, it was generous.
Okay.
Complete fabrication.
Okay.
There were a few points in time when he probably ballooned up a bit, or altered his diet specifically to get heavier so that they could weigh him once. And he's over 200 pounds, and they can then say that he's over 200 type thing. No, normally he's below 200. I mean, again, middleweight is probably much more ideal for him, all things considered, because he's not a big guy. And again, he keeps his... When you look at other fighters and whatnot, they do balloon up a bit between, Johnny Hendricks famously, if you want an extreme example. And then there are other guys
He's probably the reason this card is going to make so much money. So Robert Whittaker is probably going to set – he probably is going to have to owe CM Punk a nice, Christmas card or roast or something.
The only thing Robert Whittaker is going to owe CM Punk is a punch in the face.
No, because he's going to help him clean up with the pay-per-view buys.
Watch the
pay-per-view If he makes any money off the pay-per-view buys, it's going to be mainly because of Punk.
Yeah.
Or Yoel Romero.
I'd argue you might even have Holly as a bigger draw at this point because Holly still has this bizarre popularity despite clearly being at the end of her career.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, and that's the weirdest thing. The shine that she got from punting Ronda's head into the fifth row, despite her woes since, has not worn off.
So let me see. How many pay-per-views? 208. What did 208 do?
I mean, again, she's not great, but she's a surprisingly
reliable. she's not a big draw on pay-per-view. Come on.
No, but I also question whether or not, again, how much is, we've all seen the CM Punk experiment. How much is he going to add to a $60 price tag?
For one thing, you're underestimating the crazy fandom.
I am not.
Him.
I had to deal with him the last
time
around.
You are, no. Because he is one of the.
I cannot tell you how many people I had just deliberately insult me in the comments. He is still one of the most
talked about stars of wrestling on the planet, and he hasn't stepped into a WWE ring in over 4 years. And people are still talking about him and asking when he's coming back.
Because they're stupid.
And I have to sift through those comments.
I know.
And
believe
explain
me,
I'm still reporting on CM Punk and people asking about CM Punk.
Hey, again, like when he fought, I got a mountain of crap because I called him by his real name in coverage.
Right.
Because I do that with everybody. Like I do that with Brazilians.
Yeah.
who are promoted by their nicknames.
Who should have fabricated names in the instance of some of their real names?
They can get unwieldy. They absolutely. I mean, like Elizu Zaleski dos Santos. His last name is
no matter
Zaleski
how you
dos
feel
Santos.
about Punk in his joke of an MMA career, if this card does big money, it's mainly going to be because of Punk, and I stand by that.
I'm struggling to see this do 500,000.
I think it'll do around like 350 to 400, which is for the UFC. That's pretty big these days for their pay-per-view business.
All right. As for the prelims, this is actually a pretty good card top to bottom, which is a rarity these days. We have a heavyweight fight between Alistair Overeem and Curtis Blades. I like Overeem because I don't like Blades. We have a women's strawweight fight between Claudia Gadelha and Carla Esparza. I'm a little surprised Gadelha hasn't moved up to flyweight yet. I like Gadelha there. I mean, Esparza's. She gets to be the first women's strawweight champion, and that's about it. We have a really good featherweight fight between Ricardo Lamas and Mirsad Bektic. Again, I have been high on Bektic at various points in his career. I like Bektic here, actually. I mean, and I have a higher than average opinion of Ricardo Lamas, generally speaking. I like Bektic here. We have another heavyweight fight. I forgot there were 3 of them. Between Rashad Coulter and Chris De La Rocha, and you can all tune out for this fight. I will suffer, you don't have to. De La Rocha, because who cares? Then on Fight Pass, we have Rashad Evans and Anthony Smith. I can't pick Rashad Evans in good conscience at this point against any competent opponent. I mean, he hasn't fought since August of 17. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. And Anthony Smith is actually pretty good. I mean, he's coming off of that loss to Thiago Santos. He's moving up, I believe, to light heavyweight. But he's
going to murderize Rashad Evans.
I like Smith
at this point in his career, and I don't even think Anthony Smith is that good, but he's going to murderize Rashad Evans.
You don't have to be that good.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because Sam Alvey has beaten Rashad Evans. You don't have to be, as Pat says, you don't have to be that good to beat Rashad Evans at this point.
There's a flyweight fight between the number 1 contender, Joseph Benavidez, returning from a pretty significant layoff. But Benavidez is on he hasn't fought since December of 16. But Benavidez has only ever lost professionally to 2 men, Dominic Cruz and Demetrius Johnson. He's fighting Sergio Pettis. Sergio is coming off of that loss to Henry Cejudo. I imagine this will look a lot like that fight. Benavidez is just the better wrestler, and he will out-wrestle Sergio Pettis. There's a lightweight fight between Clay Guida and Charles Oliveira.
Why do they have jobs?
I'm really pulling for Charles Oliveira here because I hate Clay Guida. I actually kind of like Oliveira to grab a choke as Guida goes in on one of his stupid double legs. And Oliveira has been known to grab a guillotine now and then. And kicking everything off, we have Mike Santiago fighting Dan Ige. I think it's Ige. You lost to Arce, Santiago. These are two guys who appeared on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. I'll go with Santiago there. No real reason. Jeff, I'll start with you. Any burning desires from that group of prelims? This is
yeah.
This is
I mean,
strong
honestly,
card top to bottom.
Man, honestly, I wish we could have had some of the move a couple of these fights to last Friday's card.
Oh,
that would have really
that would have been
rounded.
so nice.
That would have. I mean, do you really need 4 Fight Pass fights? Come on here. You could have moved. You could have moved some of these fights around.
Well,
you
just wait. Just wait. We're gonna have at least 2 of these. If current trends continue, and that's a massive asterisk, mind you, at least one of these fights is gonna fall out before the thing starts.
Benavidez versus Pettis. That would have been a good fight for the main card. Maybe it wouldn't have been like fireworks, but that would have been a good fight to put on the main card.
You could have easily put that in the co-main event from Fight Night 131. And then have Gillespie and Pichel as your featured.
But
bout.
no, you have that Gadelia versus Esparza. Oh wait. So is this fight happening? I'm confused. Didn't Esparza get? No, that's Aguilar. I'm sorry. I got her mixed up with another fighter for a second. So that's a good fight.
It's fair. They fight similarly.
Lamas versus Bektish. That's a great fight. So yeah, I like this. This is a quality set of prelims with a lot of quality fighters on it, all things considered.
Pat, what are you looking forward to out of it? Again, there's some good fights there.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit before. I really like the Lamas versus Bektic fight. I'm also a believer in Mirsad Bektic. I think he's shown a lot so far, and if he's able to win and win impressively against Ricardo Lamas, that's a huge jump in terms of how he's looked being justified against lesser opposition. If you can do it to Lamas, then you're a pretty darn good fighter. So I definitely look forward to that. I always look forward to Claudia Gadelha fighting. It'll be interesting to see how she rebounds. She basically, in her last fight, found out that she can't always rely on just being better and stronger in the clinch, because Jessica Andrade, even though she may not have the grappling pedigree that Claudia did, she was too big and too strong and able to muscle around very easily. Carla Esparza is not that same type of physical presence, but that's what Carla's going to look to do, because really that's all she has. And Claudia is actually going to have an edge in the striking in this fight, which is not something she often gets to enjoy. I would like to see Claudia show a varied approach here rather than just straight up grapple, box when you're tired, not well. I want to see her use her boxing to set up her takedowns. I want to see her really box Esparza, because when Claudia boxes before she gasses, which happens because she commits too much to her grappling, she looks good. She throws a real good straight right hand. She knows how to use a jab to close distance. I'd like to see more of that from her. I want to see the girl who looks more akin to the girl who fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk in their first fight and Karolina Kowalkiewicz than the one who got out-muscled and looked confused against Andrade. This is a good fight for her to be able to experiment because she's got such a one-dimensional opponent in front of her. I love Alistair Overeem versus Curtis Blaydes. I do. You know why? Because there's 2 big heavyweights who hit real hard. And, Blaydes fought a stinker against Mark Hunt where he clearly won, but almost got knocked out in the process. And aside from that, he's only lost to Ngannou.
Yeah, as fairness to Curtis Blaydes, that's his only loss, and that's because Ngannou opened up a really nasty cut on his one of his eyebrows, if memory serves.
It's not as though he got slept like a lot of people do against Ngannou. Like Alistair Overeem, for example.
God, that punch he caught Overeem with.
These are 2 big guys who hit real hard and don't necessarily take it all that well in Overeem's case. The potential for fireworks is very high here, and I like that. As far as Fight Pass, Benavidez and Pettis on Fight Pass is somewhat heartbreaking.
Not for those of us who shell out money for Fight Passes. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, well, when they make Fight Pass worthwhile, I'll probably subscribe to it.
Nah, they might wind up bundling it with ESPN Plus going forward, which wouldn't be the worst move in the world, actually.
Well, then I definitely won't subscribe to it. But yeah, that's a very good fight. Granted, I think Benavidez is worlds better than Pettis, and I don't think your comparison of this looking like Pettis' fight with Cejudo is wrong, but I could easily see Benavidez finishing this too, as long as he's in fighting shape, because it's been a little while since we saw Joe fight.
Yeah.
The last time we saw Joe fight was against Henry Cejudo, and that was over a year ago. So there's a chance he may not necessarily have that spring in his step that we expect. He's 33, so he's not necessarily way past his prime, but he's at that tipping point where it can start to get away from him if he's not as active as he needs to be.
And
Other
if
than
there's
that,
a division you don't want to slip in, it's the smaller ones.
yeah. Other than that, you know what? I'll screw the other than that. That's a lot more potential and fun on a prelim card than we ever get the chance to talk about. That's good.
Yeah. Again, this is a really strong card, basically top to bottom. And all the idiots are going to cheer for Clay Guida, even though, God, his fights suck.
There's no reason to cheer for that guy.
I'm going to cheer for Clay Guida.
All right.
Yes, but you're a contrarian heel, Jeff.
You want to know why? Because we both like Big Lebowski.
Jeff,
And I
everybody likes the Big Lebowski.
I don't like the Big Lebowski.
And you know what? I've always enjoyed my interactions with Clay Guida when I run into him.
That's fair. Now, you have much more interaction with him on anything approaching an individual level than I ever have or will. So,
Not saying we're buddies or anything, but
no.
I like
your perspective is different than mine. I only have to listen to his interviews and watch his fights.
He's probably a great guy to go get a beer with or something.
He does seem like one of those guys.
Watching him fight, however, is torturous.
I mean, you guys are being. I mean, those fights were a long time ago, but he has had.
No. Not a long time ago. The Joe.
Okay.
I'll give him the Lozon fight because it ended quickly. The Eric Koch fight sucked.
Tyson Griffin, that was an amazing fight. That's one of my favorite. That's what the fight with Roger.
I'd have to rewatch that. It's been too long since I've seen it.
These are both about 10 years old. So I mean, the fights with Tyson Griffin and Roger Huerta.
Okay.
I thought the fight with Benson Henderson was a fight of the year candidate. I mean,
okay. I give
all fights
Benson
he
more
lost.
credit than
All
that,
fights
for
he
that
lost.
fight.
But I mean,
yeah, look,
and he has had some awkward fights.
The only time Guida's in a fight that you can stand watching is when he loses.
No. I was there live when he beat Rafael dos Anjos. He broke Rafael dos Anjos' jaw and then submitted the guy. Okay? And he broke his jaw.
Yeah.
It wasn't a freak injury. Guys, it wasn't a freak injury when he snapped his jaw. He did it with his hands. Maybe a dog, the sun shines on a dog's ass once every day and all that. And maybe that's true for Clay Guida. But throughout his career, I think he's had some pretty great fights. He's a journeyman and all that, but he has my respect. I'll say that. He has my respect.
I respect anyone willing to get in there and fight, anyone who does it as consistently as he does. Absolutely. I've never been in an MMA fight. And we're not going to get into the long, sad history of my personal life here. But there's certainly a level of respect that's afforded to that. That in no way stops his fights from being painful to watch for me. All right. Anyway, that will be UFC 225 this coming Saturday. I will have live coverage in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania. So, again, feel free to stop by and say hello. And as a warning to anyone who this might offend or annoy, I'm going to refer to CM Punk by his real name. Because I refer to fighters by their real names.
You're not going to refer to him as Chick Magnet?
No. He had to admit that under oath. That's almost as crazy as the guy who sued to get that. You'll remember this story, Pat, from, I forget what territory it was, but somebody won another guy's, yacht in a match. And then sued him over it. And to protect the business, he gave him the boat.
Yeah, that happened. That happened in Memphis over a car.
That's anyway. So I
kayfabe, everybody. Kayfabe.
Yeah.
That's just your warning, everybody. I refer to fighters by their real names. That's just what I do. I've made that my policy since I realized how woefully misinformed the major MMA promotions have allowed fandom to be, and I'm anti-ignorance more than anything else. So,
if we don't get to refer to Antonio Carlos Jr. only as Shoeface, Phil Brooks is how he's named, damn it.
Hey, and look, when I talk about CM Punk, I call him CM Punk. When I talk about Antonio Carlos Jr., I do tend to refer to him as Shoeface. When I do coverage, it's your name. That's, again, if I ever met the man, I'd certainly refer to him by whatever he preferred to be referred to. I'm not needlessly antagonizing him, or anyone else for that matter, but when I'm referring to a professional sport, I refer to you by your actual name. That's just my policy. All right. Moving on to news. The one I remember what I had forgotten earlier.
Bisping.
Bisping, yeah. And I want to give everyone a chance here to say something about that, because I know both Jeff and Pat have interestingly opposing views on this. But Michael Bisping, former UFC middleweight champion, has retired. He announced it on his podcast. I tend to think this will stick. I know. Believe me, MMA retirements are almost as bad as professional wrestling retirements. And if Michael Bisping were retiring for any reason other than the fact that his eyesight is failing, I might have some skepticism, but this is a guy who's got years and years. He's made all the money he's going to make. He's only going to get beat up more, and his eyesight is going.
Is he blind in the bad eye?
I think he's considered legally what would be constituted as blind.
Right.
He does have vision there, but it's not any kind
Well,
of...
I'm legally blind without glasses.
Yeah.
So, but does he have vision at all from that eye?
He has vision. It's not considered good.
Okay.
There's a reason everyone in his last several fights has seriously damaged him by attacking from that side.
Yeah, he doesn't have strong peripheral vision at all, which is the big thing. He can see things in front of him and that but he really has no peripheral vision.
Well, and the fact that it's his other eye that's starting to go a little bit now is what really precipitated this.
I just wish he didn't take that fight with Gaston. I wish that didn't happen. If I could change one, this may sound stupid, but if I could change one thing in MMA in the past, it would probably be that fight.
I have so many other... If I could change one thing about Bisping's career, it would probably be the Gastelum fight, all things considered.
All right, one thing about the Bisping fight, about his career, it would be that fight.
I also would prevent him from ever winning the title and derailing everything.
Okay,
well, look, that's just my desire for order in a chaotic universe. All right, that's all it is.
All right,
I'd have never let him take the.
All right, Thanos. Let's get the Infinity Gauntlet for you, and let's have you bring balance to the universe.
You do not want me with that gauntlet. I thought Thanos was kind, man. I'm taking up more than half.
You would.
They changed Thanos from a nihilist obsessed with death to an extreme logician in the movie. My nihilism dwarfs that of Thanos in the comics when it really manifests itself.
I believe it.
Yeah, I have no reason not to.
I mean, again, we're not getting into my long, sad mental health history either here, but
I've said in the past, after he won the title, that Bisping clinched his spot in the Hall of Fame. And I feel there are a number of reasons for that, but I feel he deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame, not necessarily for the title run, but for the fact he is the first British champion in UFC history. Tied for most wins in the UFC, right?
Yeah,
and I
think George are tied.
And also tied for most fights in the organization. He was the face of British MMA. In the tough era, UFC didn't have, and MMA in general didn't have a big presence in England. He changed that. He was basically the face of the company in England, and helped build the sport in England. And now the England and the UK are a big market for the UFC. he helped open up a whole market for them. I think his Bisping, like, he wasn't Anderson Silva, but he had a pretty successful career considering he never really had, I think, like, that skill level.
Prior to him hooking up with Jason Perillo, his fights could be hard to watch, actually.
Right.
Perillo worked a miracle with that man's career.
Bisping was when he was fighting those upper level guys, he just wasn't. He didn't look that good. He could smash tomato cans, yeah, but and he could have some wins over those top guys. But I mean, I think it says something that when he fought Rockhold, that was like his first finish in I think a good number of years, right, Robert? I guess maybe since Mayhem Miller. But that's Mayhem Miller. That's Mayhem freaking Miller. I mean, anyone could have won that fight.
No, it was the Kung. He finished Kung Lee.
Oh, Kung Lee. I'm sorry.
It was Rockhold. Decision. Choked out by Rockhold. Finished Lee.
He doesn't have many finishes.
Technical decision against Alan Belcher. He got lucky.
He doesn't have many decisions. He doesn't have many.
Yeah, no. Prior to that, it was Miller and Rivera.
There you go. I forgot about the Kung Lee, but I don't know. Am I wrong here? Does he deserve a place in the Hall of Fame or not?
Pat, I'll let you respond to that.
He's gonna get one. I think it's pretty much a guarantee. Would I put him in the Hall of Fame for what I define a Hall of Fame to be? No. I know there's that whole most wins thing, and he was the face of British MMA, which is great. He did a lot to expand there. But I never saw him, even as middleweight champion, when he was middleweight champion, as even one of the 3 best middleweights in the world. I think he's a guy who was very much right place, right time, just good enough to be there. And good for him. He made a great career for himself out of it. He should be proud of his accomplishments. But I don't think he was exceptional in any way. I think more often than not in the big fight, he didn't come out with his hand raised. And like I said, I don't think he was any type of exceptional fighter. I think he was good enough to hang around. He was good enough to take advantage of being in the right place at the right time for most of his career. I think he benefited from circumstances a lot more than a lot of fighters do. And he wouldn't be in my Hall of Fame, but he'll get into the UFC Hall of Fame.
I'm okay with him going into the Hall of Fame for a couple of reasons. One actually is the title win. I think absent that, it's a much harder case to make. With that, you have the world title. You have, for whatever it's worth, a successful title defense. And again, for whatever beating Dan Henderson by close decision in 2017 or whatever it was is worth. Might have been 16.
16.
Okay, 16. Again, how much is that worth? When you actually consider it, I don't know, but it is a successful title defense, which is one more than a lot of
What about
fighters.
Considering that a lot of the guys he lost to later on failed drug tests? Or were using PEDs? Including Chael Sonnen.
To be fair, I also thought he won the Sonnen fight, but
there you go.
No, I mean,
that fight was a title eliminator.
But by that same thing, you can also say, I'm pretty sure he lost the Matt Hamill fight.
Yes.
That fight was at a higher weight class.
I know. I get the point being that there were a lot of those, and the other reason I don't have a problem with him, and some of this is just statistical, and there's only so much that weight that carries. Again, appearances, wins, amount of time spent in the cage. But that's an important criteria. When you look, and that's an important part of the criteria for any major sporting league, the NFL or Major League Baseball. Part of their criteria is actually you must meet a minimum number of years in the league. And I know the UFC is a little bit different than all of those, but this is a guy who's been in the UFC for 10 years? I mean,
12.
He won Tough 3.
That was in 2006.
And never left. And legitimately never left. Never went on a big losing streak where you kind of wonder, why are they keeping this guy around? And yeah, there were some cans and journeymen in there that were kind of gimme wins, but how many times have we seen somebody been given a gimme and then lose? That's hardly unheard of or unprecedented in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Again, I'm okay with it. Again, between the longevity, the title defense, the overall contributions. If this was just, is he a good enough fighter in terms of actual fighting? That's a much harder. I think he's much closer to no than yes. But taken in totality, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Second news item. There was a point where Yair Rodriguez was cut from the UFC. We talked about that previously. Now he's no longer cut from the UFC, and he will be fighting against Zabit Magomed Sharipov at UFC 228. According to Yair Rodriguez, it was a big miscommunication and bad timing. So
look,
I don't know what that means.
Here's the translation for that. I wanted more money. The UFC wouldn't give me more money. I said, fine, then release me. The UFC released me, and I realized, oh crap, I can't actually make more money anywhere else. Look, they were playing hardball negotiation, and Yair blinked, is what this amounts to. And Zabit is going to massacre him. I mean, I've cooled.
But is that on? Is asking for more money? Is that on Yair or is that on his management?
Either or.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. If you have a manager, that is someone who is expressly there to represent you and your interests. They speak for you in that case. So it really doesn't matter which one it comes from. If you're having an issue with your manager where you don't think they represent you or your interests, you fire them.
Well, I'm glad they worked it out because I don't think Yair is a world beater or anything, but I think he's a fun fighter.
Look, Yair's a fun fighter. He got significantly overhyped and rushed into a level of competition he was in no way ready for. Frankie massacred him.
Well, quite frankly, I think Zabit's going to massacre him too.
Yeah. I mean, if Zabit can calm down just a little, somebody else made this comparison. I think it was Jack Slack, that Zabit reminds him of John Jones up until John fought Shogun, when John was just throwing out wild crap because he could and nobody could punish him for it. When John actually got significantly better after that, when he calmed down a little bit and learned to properly integrate. Zabit's at that phase when he needs to cool it just a bit. You still have those in your back pocket, still bust them out when you really see the opening, but you don't need to be wild.
Yair does a lot of weird, wild stuff too.
Yeah, he's also significantly less effective with it than Zabit is.
But he was able to make it work for him because he was fighting a lower level of competition. But
I mean, it barely worked for him against Alex Caceres of all people.
Right. But I'm glad they kept him around because it didn't make any sense to me to cut.
Zabit's going to beat him, and then we can get Yair back to fighting the level of opposition he should be fighting. Which is that's my big thing. Like the guy beat Alex Caceres in a mediocre fight, and then got rushed into fighting Frankie Edgar. No, Yair should not be fighting Frankie Edgar. Yair should not be fighting a top 15 featherweight right now. That's just not the level he's at, all things considered. And instead, he's fighting someone who's going to beat him, and hopefully he can get back to the level that will allow him to develop and grow as a fighter, instead of continually letting him drown in deeper waters. I'm not even a fan of the guy, and I can. That's just what you should be doing with him at this point. So, anyway, good for El Pantera being back. I can look forward to more 360 tornado kicks that hit nothing but air.
And that'll probably happen here.
Oh, they're both going to throw a bunch of them.
Yep. This is going to be your spot fest of the evening, folks.
They're going to spin, they're going to kick, they're going to miss, and then Zabit's going to realize, oh, this guy can't wrestle. That's basically how that's going to go. He's going to take him down, he's going to maul him on the ground. All right. Was there anything else we wanted to... Any other major news?
nothing major.
I don't even
I
think
would
we've
say.
had we haven't even had our recent big fight announcements for upcoming cards yet, have we?
Right. No. No.
They're probably
Congrats.
hopefully they're saving those for 225 because they've got cards coming up that need
Right.
fighters.
But congrats to Sarah McMahon. She has announced her
pregnant.
pregnancy. Good for her. She might have a little time to make a comeback after that, but good.
Which is just that's part of the reason. That's actually what inspired me to look at women's bantamweight as worse than men's light heavyweight. If you look at women's bantamweight, the number one contender is Holly, which is not an accurate representation.
Yeah, no.
I think number 2 was either Raquel or Juliana Pena, something stupid like that. Juliana Pena just had a kid. Sarah McMahon is now pregnant.
Shevchenko is probably moving down to flyweight.
Yeah, Shevchenko's at flyweight until she wins the belt and decides she doesn't want to fight her sister. Because her sister fights in that same division and is probably going to be in the UFC sooner rather than later. The closest thing you have Raquel Pennington just got smashed. The closest thing you have is Ketlin Vieja, and Vieja is not proven at an elite at that level yet.
Okay, here's your top 5 at women's bantamweight. 1 is Holly.
No.
2 is Vieja. 3 is Juliana Pena.
Just had a kid, not fighting.
4, Raquel Pennington.
Just got smashed.
5, Jermaine Durandame.
Not fighting.
And if you really want to go beyond that, we'll go top 10. 6 is Kat Zingano.
Just lost.
7 is Marion Renault.
Fighting... There's actually an interesting fight coming up with her. She's fighting... She's fighting Kat Zingano, actually, but she just submitted... Who did she just tap? She just tapped Sarah McMahon. That's what happened with Renault. But she's like 42.
Speak of the devil, number 8, Sarah McMahon.
Pregnant, not fighting.
9, Aspen Ladd.
Missed weight, utterly unproven.
And if you think that's bad, at number 10, Betch Kohea.
Not fighting, just knocked out if memory serves.
Wow,
Look,
that division took a dive.
Again,
Boys at a dumpster fire.
Wow.
My stated position on light heavyweight is dumpster fire. Women's
don't know.
bantamweight is there, or worse.
I have to. Can we do a comparison real quick? Do you guys mind?
No, go for it. We have 30 minutes or so before we run out of recording time.
Because I just think it's interesting and bears some comparison.
I'll give flyweight at least credit for being new. Women's bantamweight doesn't have that excuse.
Well, I was saying light heavyweight, not flyweight.
Yeah, go ahead with light heavyweight.
Yeah. Okay. So, number 1, Gustafsson. Okay. I don't think any of us have any issue with that.
No, that's fair.
Okay. 2, Volkan Oezdemir.
Just got smashed by Cormier.
3, Glover Teixeira.
Just had a fight. I think he won a terrible fight, but before that got obliterated by Gustafsson.
Oh, I honestly, the women's bantamweight is looking better to me right now. 4, Ilir Latifi.
He just had a pretty big win, actually.
Won his last 2, Tyson Pedro and St. Preux. 10 years ago, this would not put you at, or 5 years ago even, this would not put you at number 4.
No. 5, Jan Blachowicz.
Just had a pretty big win over Jimmy Manoa.
6, Jimmy Manoa.
Who?
Here's where. Okay, I'll wait till you guys comment on Jimmy, but it takes a turn.
Jimmy is who he is at this point, you know.
And at number 7, we have a tie.
Ooh, please tell me one of them's Oven St. Preux.
It is. Oven St. Preux is tied at 7 with Shogun.
OSP just got knocked out. Shogun. He knocked out Shogun in like 5 seconds when Shogun slipped on that skateboard.
Why do we have a tie? What is going on here?
Because it's done in aggregate, it just winds up as a statistical thing where they're both coming in at the same place. That doesn't bother me at all. Actually, that's perfectly fine.
Thus, at number 9, Corey Anderson.
Didn't he just get knocked out?
Yes, he did. And rounding out your top 10, Misha Serkinov.
Who lost his last two, right?
Yep. Yeah, he got knocked out by Uzdemir and then stopped by Glover. Look,
sorry. And at 11 is Pat Cummins, who's like homeless.
Yeah, and you're 11 through 15, and granted this isn't updated after Volante just lost to Sam Alvey. You have Cummins, Reyes, Antigulov, Pedro, and Volante.
Volante?
No. Those haven't been updated yet.
Yeah.
The new rankings will come.
Volante, even before the Alvey fight being on there, is offensive.
He was 15. He rounded up. But I'm sorry, top 10. I'm still leaning towards women's bantamweight is better.
The only reason I can't go along with that is the number of women in women's bantamweight who are ranked who are not fighting.
How did this happen?
I thought you were going to say mainly because of the presence of Gustafsson.
You know what?
No,
that's the only thing.
I mean, yeah, and you've got Gustafsson, who's legitimately a good
I blame all the fans who whined about Phil Davis and Ryan Bader. This is your fault. Robert, this is your fault. I put this on you too.
For fun's sake, rounding out 11 through 15 at women's bantamweight, Lena Landsberg, Irene Aldana, Lucy Pudilova, Sarah Maras, who I wasn't even sure was still on the roster, and Gina Mazzani.
Yeah, Landsberg just beat Mazzani.
Put Angela Magana on there too.
Nope, she got cut. Shut up. We do not reference her. She's terrible. She's not with the UFC anymore.
So what?
She was at strawweight.
That hasn't stopped rankings in the past.
No, I'm pretty sure at some point we're going to see Evan Tanner ranked.
Oh, God. That's almost in poor taste.
Evan Tanner is probably still good enough to be a top 10 light heavyweight at this point.
I mean, you could put his corpse in there with Shogun, and Shogun might slip on another skateboard.
I mean, having Ryan Bader and Phil Davis wouldn't have solved all the
fights
problems.
Would still suck, but at least you'd have some more legitimacy.
At least they would look slightly more respectable. Only slightly.
Yeah.
Alternatively, Bader would have been smashed a few more times and might have quit.
I'd be fine. You know what? I'd be fine if they even picked up Emmanuel Newton and he'd be on here.
You know what?
This
Chuck Liddell comeback movement is gaining steam now, isn't it?
Oh, God. No. Chuck wants to come back and fight John Jones. Like, do we want to see... I mean, look, if you want to see a televised execution, there are states you can go to.
I don't know, man. I think Bellator's on to something with these freak show, quote-unquote, legends fights. I think there's money to be made.
There is absolutely money to be made. It's the only money Bellator's drawing.
I think there's definitely a reason why we should have Rampage Vanderlei 4 with the winner going on to be the number 15 ranked. I can't.
You want no. Here's actually the saddest thing about what you just said. I can't fault the logic. If Rampage or Vanderlei say knocks out the other, are we really going to say they're worse than Sam Alvey? I'm just assuming Sam Alvey takes the 15th spot when the rankings are updated. Are we really going to say that Fat Page or Vanderlei is a worse fighter than Sam Alvey?
I can't. Can anyone argue?
Again, this is the supremely depressing thing about the UFC's light heavyweight rankings. I might complain about a couple of spots, but, oh, hey, Corey Anderson just got knocked out, still a top 10 guy. Like, then you look at the rest of the roster and go, you know what? That might actually be an accurate representation. That's the
When did Shogun even fight last?
Shogun's last fight was a win over John Volante, if memory serves me correctly.
Oh, okay. And that was over a year ago. You see, I'm like, if you haven't fought in
he stopped John Volante in March of 17.
My feeling is, if you haven't fought in a calendar year,
Shogun's on a 3-fight winning streak.
Off the rankings you go.
Or at least have a fight scheduled.
Shogun's on a 3-fight winning streak, guys.
God. Okay, so, I had cast my vote for light heavyweight being the worst. Rob had cast his vote for women's bantamweight being the first. Jeff, would you care to be the tiebreaker here?
Light heavyweight, man.
All right.
All right.
I will say this: if I'm measuring this against where it's been at its peak, light heavyweight has fallen significantly further.
Because, and to me, it's fairly simple. This used to be one of the best, most exciting divisions in the sport, in the UFC, and you let 2 top 5 quality light heavyweights go to Bellator.
10. Phil Davis was top 10, not top 5 at the time he was left go.
All right.
But still top 10.
Guys who could have been in that conversation, I believe.
This was in 2009, 2010, 2008, 2011, this was the division to watch. Like,
up until John Jones started becoming a basket case.
And really, let's be fair, all that did was expose the problem.
Because, I mean, at least if John Jones was active, at least we could have possibly gotten that rematch.
John would have been a 2-weight world champion by now. He would have won the heavyweight title.
Or we could have gotten that rematch with Gustafsson at least.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yes. That's the biggest. Honestly, more than anything, and I know it seems small, like, more than anything, the thing I'm really upset about with Jones going off the rails is that we didn't get a rematch to arguably the best light heavyweight fight they ever had in the UFC.
There's no arguably there. Well, if you say light heavyweight ever, then there's a few pride fights we have to consider.
Right.
Well, I'm saying strictly in the UFC, then yeah,
right.
Okay. I just didn't want to
that is the best light heavy. That is the best UFC light heavyweight fight of all time. Period. It is the best UFC light heavyweight title fight by a country mile. And I would argue it's the best light heavyweight fight ever. I think it does edge out some of the true classics we did see in Pride, like Shogun and Nogueira one.
Yeah.
I mean, even Luke Rockhold moving up, and I like Luke Rockhold. I'm not sure, like,
does he really have what's left in the tank to be relevant at 205?
Yeah.
You don't have. Do you need all that much to be relevant at 205?
He might. I mean,
he might, but at the same time, we were also. Jeff, you and I were on the same page with questioning, does he even really want to keep fighting?
Yeah.
No, true. I mean, but light heavyweight is in such a state where if a guy like Luke Rockhold won one impressive fight, they would book him in a title fight right away. I think they were gonna book. I think that fight with Gustafsson was gonna be a boo-boo title fight, basically.
Probably.
It was gonna be an interim. I bet you that's what they were gonna do.
Then they were going to try and fight DC to fight Luke Rockhold, which would have been hilarious.
Teammates don't fight teammates.
If you believe Cormier is going to be gone within the year anyway.
That's entirely... I'm not entirely sure he's going to recover from Stipe smashing his face in.
Okay.
And that's an exaggeration, mind you, but that is the way I'm leaning when I think about that fight. I really like Stipe's chances there.
And Pat, I was curious, since you weren't here last week, any thoughts on UFC's new broadcast deal with ESPN?
Ultimately, I'm not a fan, and I just think again, you're I know what ESPN is, and we all know what ESPN is at this point. I think they were actually better off with Fox using it as a principal point of its programming on a more widely reachable format. ESPN is going to my understanding, mainly use UFC cards to bump up subscriptions for ESPN Plus, rather than showcase them on ESPN or ESPN2 proper. And I think the UFC's overall visibility is going to hurt by that. Because say what you want to about Fox Sports 1. Fox Sports 1 was airing a ton of UFC content in a day. In a 24-hour...
It's why, you and one of the group chat you and I are in, Pat, when Gavin brought up just how much content Fox is ordering from WWE pertaining to SmackDown.
Yeah,
it's because they're losing like 10 hours daily of broadcast time that was UFC material.
Honestly, I would estimate probably in a given day 12 hours, which is half the day, that their content aired was UFC television, UFC related product, whether it was a recap of fight cards, a desk show.
You were probably looking at 60 to 70% of their total hours in a week was UFC content.
Yeah. So that's a huge thing where the UFC loses a lot of visibility to me because ESPN Plus is not yet off the ground successful. Really, the only content that ESPN Plus has had any kind of success with broadcasting has been soccer because of its worldwide popularity. And I believe they are offering a free trial this weekend because of the upcoming Terrence Crawford-Jeff Horn welterweight title fight. But aside from that, ESPN Plus is not doing the numbers they had hoped.
Well, they also, I think, kind of rushed it out of beta, which
much the same way they did with Fight Pass in the UFC.
In fairness, Fight Pass actually turned into a usable platform.
Yes, after time. With this, though, you're not getting that single stream of content with that vault of media behind it that you can watch. This is very much like a streaming option versus live TV, so it has that stigma to it. And, I mean, if the UFC is able to sign a big deal and get money out of ESPN, good for them.
$1.5 billion.
Yeah, I don't think they're in a position where long-term they're looking at things and saying 1.5 is a bad deal long-term. 1.5 is never a bad deal, but I do think it's going to hurt their visibility versus what they're able to do with the Fox platform.
Well, here's an interesting note I wanted to add on the Fox deal, and this came from the Hollywood Reporter. According to this report, Fox let the UFC go, feeling they couldn't sell it to advertisers, but with WWE as a family-friendly product, sales pitches will become easier.
You know, that's an interesting point, and if you ever want to have
okay. Here's another
go
note. Sorry, Robert.
No, go ahead.
Here's what someone actually said to the Hollywood Reporter. An anonymous Fox, a former staffer for Fox. We could not sell UFC. Any wrestling is family friendly. If you have wrestling, you can find cash. I think it's a big win for Fox. It's a great trade. Okay, so that's coming from a former staffer for Fox, but a former staffer nonetheless.
Let me just specifically point this out. If you ever, to any MMA fan out there, if you would ever like to feel insulted, and bear in mind, I don't advocate this on a regular basis, because like being insulted is like being offended. You know, no one can actually do it. You have to choose to. You can't offend me. I choose to take offense. If you ever want to feel insulted, look at what is advertised on a UFC card on Fox Sports 1. And I don't just mean what, they have the guys, what they have the broadcasters pimp. Look at the commercials. Look at what they actually are trying to sell. Look at what they think you want to buy. It's almost exclusively alcohol, razor blades of some variety.
Metro.
Sure. That's just UFC. That's just because Metro's with the UFC. That's you have the Metro. So you have the Metro PCS. So there's a crappy wireless network. Energy drinks, male enhancement pills, and video games.
Thank you, Frank Thomas.
With his bench on a. That bit where he's actually bench pressing on that machine and doing it improperly is hilarious to me, mind you. But just seriously, think about that for just a minute. About what that says about who they think is the demographic for the product they're putting out there. And if you want to be insulted about that, go for it. I think that's a massive failure of, first of all, the salesman, the guy selling that ad time, that you can't actually point to the diversity of people watching this, that you can't actually point to anything else like that. I mean, you're just bad at your job because there are actually numbers supporting it. And what does it say about, the people who are willing to spend money on it? That, no, sure, we'll spend, WWE is a family-friendly product. I laugh at this. I know they've been trying really hard to go that way for the last 10 years or so, but I still laugh at it. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, MMA is not something you necessarily want your 6-year-old watching, but it's not all, the Just Bleed demographic. We are not all angry white men watching this sport. Like, this is a massive failure on the part of the actual salesmen, on the executives to understand that, and quite frankly, a significantly missed opportunity by other products to advertise in that space.
it did. It didn't really offend me, but it's like
It doesn't offend me either. I choose not to be
But
offended.
I mean, like, if I'm Dana White and if I'm Ari Manuel, like, I'm a little pissed at whoever said that, and I'd be
of course.
I would be making some phone calls and trying to negotiate a ballistic missile launch.
I mean, look, my thing about that is all you're doing is revealing that you suck at your job. Well, we can't sell the UFC. You are clearly not a good salesman. I mean, I had the same thing with that unfunny guy on television. I know that's a very broad descriptor. I think it was Trevor Noah. Hang on. I think it was Trevor Noah because he said, boy, it was sure harder to make fun of Barack Obama. So you suck at your job. So you're lazy and you're bad at your job is all you're saying. It was hard. I didn't want to do it. Okay, you're lazy and you're bad at your job. Good to know. I mean really,
exactly
like, that's like... And really, the notion that you couldn't make fun of Barack Obama is
People
hilarious.
didn't want to make fun of. People didn't want to make fun of Barack Obama.
And for some reason, none of them will actually say that. No, I thought he was right. I thought his God complex was totally justified.
I've talked to writers.
Yeah, no, they bought into his God complex.
They did not want to make. People didn't. The comedians and the TV writers did not want to make fun of Obama.
They thought he was right. They bought into the hype around him and didn't want to point out his condescension, his God complex, or the fact that he was actually a selfie stick celebrity president that directly led to Donald Trump. Sorry, I don't want to get too political here, especially since we're short on time.
No, it's accurate. It's accurate.
Now again, my thing is that just means you're lazy and you're bad at your job. We couldn't sell the UFC, so you're lazy and you're a bad salesman. Good to know.
That's if I'm Hillary, where was Obama for her?
Obama hated her, man. That's why.
He didn't campaign for her at all.
I don't want to get into it. We've got like 15 minutes of recorded time left. I don't want to get into that.
All right. Well, that was my one major note I wanted to add to the ESPN because that came out this week.
Okay.
So,
and it's relevant that maybe ESPN will do a better job selling it. Who knows? I mean, you'd hope they could because they're paying a lot for it.
Has ESPN been in decline in recent years?
Very, very much so. Hence the layoffs that you've seen, which include some of, unfortunately, their most beloved and respected on-air presenters who have gone the way of the dodo bird, most notably John Clayton.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, again, they're paying a lot for this, so let's hope they can sell ad space relative to it. I mean, if they can't...
My last question, sort of unrelated, but Jim Cornette said Fox getting SmackDown makes Fox the A show.
Pat, you have thoughts on... I understand you have Jim Cornette on the line.
Well, goddamn, fucking Fox signed a deal for $1 million fucking dollars. They're going to get SmackDown over there. You think for a goddamn second they're going to be putting motherfucking people on Raw when they got to make Fox money? Goddamn, what the fuck? Give me a cheeseburger, extra cheese, motherfucker, extra onion, extra pickles, extra mayo. That's basically
what he said on his show.
Well, look, I will give any excuse to have Pat do his Jim Cornette impression is good enough for me, man. Just for the record. No, I mean, and look, in all fairness, Jim has... There is a cogent argument in Jim Cornette's ramblings. They're being paid more for that, and it's on a bigger network than USA.
Yeah, it's that whole thing where, like, okay, Fox is shelling out this money. You think for a second they're going to allow John Cena to make more appearances on USA than they are on Fox? Come on.
But will WWE actually treat SmackDown like a bigger deal now? Because
they're going to be forced to.
We'll find out. I mean, hey, it would be hilarious for them to keep treating it like as the B show when it's actually drawing more money and on a more visible network. I mean, let's just see what happens.
Now I got to give credit to Cornette because I mean I'm not a Cornette fan and he makes me angry so often, but he made a good point where like WWE is making all this money now. There's no excuse for them not to be paying their talent like insurance and getting them set up with all that now.
They just don't want to. If they do that, they'll make them. They'll be smacked with their employees so fast.
Yes, here's the thing about that. Like, not only yes, WWE's absolutely making more revenue as a whole as a company because of these things. There's also many, many more avenues for the guys individually through merchandising to be making that revenue too. I mean, if you look on WWE Shop, even the most obscure superstars like Kurt Hawkins have merchandise out there that they're able to sell and get good royalties on.
I know about the royalties and all that, but like, why not give them health insurance?
Because if they provide it, they're so close to being employees already. I mean, look, if the IRS takes one look at the WWE's financials, not just how much they brought in, but if they actually take a look at that and decide to sue on behalf of the wrestlers to the NTLB,
they should. But I mean, they should do that.
But here's the thing:
just like I think
the wrestlers themselves, especially the top guys, they don't want that because it's going to regulate their income and they're going to have a ceiling on that income as opposed to being able to make as much as they want.
Yeah, and really, if the WWE is found to have been, how is the language around this? If they are
employing people as full-time employees as opposed to independently operating contractors who have term-length contracts, that's going to separate their classification from contractors to employees. When you're an employee of...
they can also apply that retroactively as kind of...
most wrestlers would not want to be considered employees, is what you're saying, Pat.
Correct. They would prefer to be independent contractors who can negotiate their fee and potential earnings rather than become an employee who is designated a salary or wage of X amount of stuff worked to that point. The guys who don't want that, the guys who want to be employees and have insurance and a 401k and stuff, are not necessarily a 401k but a pension, are the guys who are working at the very, very bottom of the card. And I'm not saying that to be dismissive of them. Yeah, even your mid-carders. I'm not saying that to be dismissive of them, but it's better for them in terms of they've understood that they're never going to be on the top of the card making the big, big money. So they want to be taken care of long-term when they have responsibilities that they have to enact. And listen, I would love it if those guys had a pension. They entertained me for the entirety of my life and still will. And I would love it if they were taken care of. But honestly, a lot of it becomes a personal responsibility factor where you have a 401k that you set up with the pretty good money that you're making right now. You don't have to be making John Cena money to have a 401k established where you'll be able to live your life over a period of time. A lot of these guys, unfortunately, do mismanage their money, and that's a shame. And, you hate hearing these hard luck stories, but that's how it goes. So the reason is, they want to be taken care of because maybe they feel they're owed it by doing what they do, but there's nothing that's stopping them from taking care of themselves. So
I think for as much as they have to work, and as much as WWE
the real question is whether or not they have been misclassified, and I think there's an argument that professional wrestlers with the WWE are employees rather than independent contractors. I don't know enough about it to say definitively one way or the other, but I certainly think there's an argument for it.
I think there is an argument that they can afford some health insurance for them or some kind of deal for them.
But they also pay them enough where they can find their own insurance provider and pay that premium from their earnings. That's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would love these guys to have a pension more than anything. Above anything else, I would love it if WWE created a pension just for these guys for retirement, even if it's something stupid. If you give these guys a check for $500 a month, as long as they meet some type of requirement or what have you, even if it's for a non-compete, with that when they are actively finish out their WWE run, they don't go wrestle anywhere else like TNA or Japan or what have you. Whatever. Now, that being said, again, not to take up all the time on it, but I work for a company that has an independent retirement fund of your 401k, where if you are a full-time employee with said company with a year of service minimum under your belt, what happens is because it's still a family-owned company, our top-level executives who are the family, they have not changed their salaries. What happens is when the company profits in a big way, which happens regularly, thankfully, they put that money into an employee retirement fund that all full-time 1 year or more serving employees are automatically enrolled into.
I'm just saying, I feel like WWE could do like last week, Robert. I talked about like a goodwill, like let's pat ourselves on the back for doing something nice for the athletes.
Yeah.
I think WWE could do something like that too after this deal.
I feel like they could do that pension type thing that I described, or
Right,
retirement, whatever you want to call it.
I'd
I
be
feel like
down for
that's
that.
feasible, meeting certain circumstances. Because again, we have to think of the revolving door of performers that have come through, and what
Yeah,
the
you would have
circumstances
to you would have to set up a specific criteria that that they would have to
Yes.
meet for it
Because
to go through.
look,
But that can be set up.
there are guys who don't take care of themselves and who made mistakes, but there are other guys who I think made mistakes and are trying to turn their life around. And WWE does have like the wellness policy that they'll give to former stars and all that. Where they will open the door for drug rehabilitation. I think that's good. But I think there are other guys who maybe did everything right, weren't really bad, didn't really make those mistakes, but they don't really have many other prospects or whatever.
I'll give you this one as an example where I think they should have some say to step in.
Very
You guys know the
briefly.
one-man gang, Akeem. He lives in Louisiana. He lost a lot of things of his that were personal during a very bad flood. He has insurance on his home and everything. However, because of the circumstances in Louisiana, a lot of things are not covered based on its proximity to floods and what have you. He was trying to go fund $20,000 to replace a lot of the things that he had lost. And he was doing things like if you gave X amount, you get this autograph or what have you, just to try to get stuff together. I don't see why WWE couldn't step in, as he was a loyal employee to them. He did not, do anything to negate the company. He was on good terms with them. That's a PR moment that they could have stepped in and probably helped with. Or at least given him something where he's officially signed to their Legends deal, does autograph signings under their banner. But as far as insurance goes, these guys all make more than enough money to pay for their own insurance adequately from year to year. And if they let it lapse or whatever, that's on them.
Well, I mean, Pat, you're assuming that it's easy for them to get insurance in such a dangerous profession.
They pay a higher premium,
It's
but that's also
I mean, look,
for
it's
their
insurance, not charity.
Yeah.
All right, we're running low on recorded time here, so I'm gonna.
All right. Well, I like the conversation.
We'll have to put a pin in this and potentially revisit it at a future
I
date.
like the conversation nonetheless. So thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
No, I appreciate it. One of the things I like about this show, I can talk about stuff like that. I will say that I think, and this is the last word here, then we're going to go into plugs. The WWE should do on a more regular basis something, and the UFC I think has started doing this. And bear in mind the UFCs can be hilariously bad at times, but those summits or retreats where they try to educate people about financial literacy, about what your money is right now, where it's going to come from. If you're not going to actually provide it, take a more active role in educating everyone involved about what their own responsibilities are as it pertains to your money and your life once this part of your life ends. All right, on that note, Jeff, what would you like to plug? I know there's a couple of movies you've seen.
Tuesday is Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, so early review for that. Then Saturday, the highly anticipated sequel, Incredibles 2, written and directed by Brad Bird. Whether it's good or not, I've been wanting to see this for a long time, so I hope it's good. It's good. It looks good. It looks good. From what I've seen, and I hope. I mean, to me, it doesn't even. If it's about half as good as the original, because the original is that good, that would be enough for me. So check out my review of the first ever Star Wars movie to bomb at the box office, Solo, a Star Wars story. My review of Deadpool 2. Reviews coming, some more stuff I have coming out, and I will be at E3 next week. So
right,
thank you guys. Have a good night.
Good night, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sorry about the aspects.
That's all right. They'll bounce back. Pat, what would you like to plug?
Okay, so recently on TV Party, since it's been a few weeks that you guys have heard my voice, apologies to those who missed me. Congratulations to those who didn't. It was a good run you had. On TV Party on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, myself, Mark Radulich, Jesse Starcher, and Andrew Graham, who I had the first time the pleasure of recording with, reviewed the YouTube Red series Cobra Kai. The long-awaited the long-awaited follow-up to the Karate Kid series. that is now in half-hour episode format. It is my favorite series in some time. I say this not only as totally 80s Pat, but as an objective viewer of television, movies, and film. It honestly is very well thought out, very, very layered, and I think anybody who enjoys good storytelling, aside from being a fan of The Karate Kid, or even not a fan of the original series, would like and appreciate what this series does. Going forward, I will be on an upcoming episode of Source Material where we will be reviewing the Fantastic Four storyline, the trial of Reed Richards, in which Reed himself is put on trial by various alien races for his culpability in allowing Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, to live on and not die.
Reed's a terrible person. It doesn't need to be said.
He's a terrible person, and at the same time, the greatest hero that the Marvel Universe has ever seen. It's an interesting dichotomy.
Genuinely wonderful dichotomy written into him.
Yes, it's probably this more than any other story really gets into the dichotomy that you see presented in that regard. And for everybody who loves comics but has no perception of the Fantastic Four, you're missing out on what was from 1962 to 1988 the best written continuous comic series that there was. And I say that in all seriousness, with perhaps the best characters, developments, and heart of any comic you will ever read. And Reed is at the very heart of it. I think Reed is arguably the most interesting written character in all of comicdom.
Dude, Sue's miscarriage will just rip your guts out.
Again, there's so many great Fantastic Four stories, I can't go through them all. But this is one of the better ones, especially if you really don't know Reed or understand Reed. This is one where you really get to see the full picture of just how great he can be, how terrible he can be, his humanity, which often gets misplaced somewhere because he's thought of as Mr. Logic. This is the internal conflict of a person having a Spock and a McCoy that are both very strong.
Yeah. I'll be looking forward to that. All right, as for me, got to be very brief here. I will be in Fact or Fiction this week in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania, so give that a read. Vote for who you think won. Hopefully me, but if I lose, I lose. I can certainly accept the results of the polling. We'll be back next week to review UFC 225, and I believe we will preview Fight Night 132. No, we will not. That's not until the 23rd. So next week we will just review UFC 225. The week after we'll preview Fight Night 132.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Oh yeah. So again, tune in next week for that. Should be a good time. Again, I'll have coverage. No movie review for me. I'll not this week. Next week we'll be reviewing Fallen Kingdom, and I will crap all over it because I anticipate it being terrible. All right. Until then, thank you all very much for listening. For Jeff and Pat, I'm Robert. Thank you for listening. Please continue to be well, be safe, and no outro music this time. Too short on time. Please continue to be well, be safe, and behave. Thank you, everybody.